Hey guys, tonight we're tearing down the velvet curtains and peeking behind the straw mattresses to uncover the intimate, confusing, and occasionally downright bizarre world of medieval sex. Prepare yourselves, you're about to discover why your modern romance novels have nothing on the real scandals of the Middle Ages. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Right off the bat, let's bust the biggest myth. Medieval sex was not some endless parade of silk sheets, rose petals, and brooding lute ballads. Forget what you've seen in movies. Most of Europe's population lived in single-room homes that doubled as kitchen, barn, and bedroom. Picture a couple sneaking behind a tattered curtain, children napping on straw pallets at their feet, and a bleeding goat poking its head through the doorframe when somebody gets too loud. Privacy? A luxury. Noise control? A desperate gamble. Timing was everything. Imagine you're a peasant in 13th century England. Your bedroom is the same space where your pigs sleep, where your aging grandmother knits by the hearth, and where your three rambunctious kids are supposed to keep quiet. To steal a moment of intimacy, you'd wait until the animals were settled, the kids were face down in their hay, and your elderly aunt was downstairs brewing ale. If you succeeded, congratulations, you might get 5 minutes alone before someone stomps in looking for supper. If you failed, well, let's just say your reputation could suffer worse than a burnt batch of bread. Now, if you lived in a castle or manor, you'd think things might be easier, right? Even nobility shared beds with servants, guards, or junior courtiers who were there for moral support. Upper-class bedrooms were less about privacy and more about legal oversight. Many families kept written records of who slept where and when, all in the name of inheritance disputes and pious record-keeping. A cleric might stand by, jotting down the marital consummation schedule like a medieval human resources manager, ensuring the line of succession remained unbroken. It's awkward, it's official, and it certainly wasn't candlelit romance. Travel made things even more chaotic. Inns often offered a communal bed, a long, plank-style affair where strangers became unwilling bedfellows. Fancy a little late-night affection during your pilgrimage? Check under your straw mat for someone else's boots first. If you were married, you might get the premium spot next to the fire pit. If you weren't, silence and shadows were your only friends. The thin walls meant gossip spread faster than the Black Death, so discretion was more than a courtesy, it was a survival strategy. And then there were the monks and nuns, locked away in monasteries and convents under strict vows of chastity. No curtains, no whispers, no midnight rendezvous, just stone walls, high garden fences, and enough boredom to drive even the holiest soul to distraction. Despite vows, tales persist of secret trysts in candlelit cloisters, hidden passages in abbey walls, and brother-sister sneaks under the guise of confessional guidance. The irony? Those sacred institutions produce some of the most detailed sex manuals, listing forbidden acts and liturgical calendars with surgical precision. Speaking of forbidden, let's talk about church rules. According to medieval theology, the sole purpose of sex was reproduction, period. Pleasure? A sinful distraction. Bonding? A worldly indulgence. Anything beyond baby-making was suspect. Bishops and theologians pored over the finer points. Foreplay, positions, moans, and sighs were all cataloged in manuals so detailed you'd think they were publishing the first guide to Kama Sutra, Catholic edition. One 13th century text even forbade any sexual activity on Sundays, Fridays, feast days, and during Lent and Advent, together almost half the year. Imagine a calendar where Tuesdays in April are among the only safe days. Medieval couples needed a divine app just to plan a date night. Within marriage, the expectations were equally joyless. A popular guide from the 1200s insisted couples engage in sex without pleasure, without sin, and without delay. No passion, no delay, kind of like baking a loaf of bread without yeast or flour. The recommended position? Missionary, of course, the most natural and least likely to offend God or your local confessor. Anything else, enthusiastic thrusting, creative angles, interludes lasting more than a mere heartbeat, was labeled immoral. If you dared to add enthusiasm, you risked a stern finger wag from your bishop. Confession was your worst enemy. Imagine kneeling before a priest who, instead of asking generic questions, demands details. How many times did you embrace your spouse since last Lent? Which days did you neglect the church's decree? Did you commit any acts beyond the sacred union? Medieval priests knew more about bedroom activities than birthdays. In some areas, confessors even recorded these admissions in parish registers, paper trails leading straight to your marital mattress. It wasn't all uniform, though. Enforcement varied wildly. In some regions, priests turned a blind eye, focusing on tithes instead of thrusts. Peasants, busy tending crops and livestock, often ignored these rules, mumbling "bless me, Father," and getting on with their lives. Townsfolk might wink at one another, acknowledging that sometimes the only thing more pressing than drought was desire. Yet in cathedral cities, where archbishops held sway, the whip of ecclesiastical penance could snap hard over any perceived impropriety. The calendar of forbidden days reads like a divine obstacle course. Sundays, off limits. Fridays, penance. Wednesdays, suspicious. Add Lent, Advent, major saints' feast days, and you're left with odd Tuesdays and random Thursdays squeezed between harvest rituals. Some manuals even specified lunar phases, no coupling when the moon is in quadrature, lest your children be deformed. Imagine explaining that to your spouse. Sorry, honey, the stars say no tonight, perhaps next quarter moon? Reputation was everything. Medieval communities were small, walls were thin, and gossip traveled faster than a courier on horseback. If neighbors caught wind of too much merriment on a holy day, you'd face shame, a possible public penance, or even a summons before the local magistrate. The fear of divine punishment mingled with social scorn, creating a potent cocktail of guilt and paranoia. Yet human nature, stubborn as ever, found workarounds, holes drilled in closet doors for stealthy rendezvous, secret rendezvous in barns after curfew, or even coded love letters slipped under the church door. Partnership in the Middle Ages often began as a business deal. Courtship meant negotiating dowries, property rights, and alliances. Your romantic prospects hinged on land, wealth, and family ties more than chemistry. Romance? Poetry lived in troubadour songs, not peasant cottages. If you hoped for candlelit dinners and whispered sweet nothings, you were better off reading those ballads. Reality involved livestock, weather forecasts, and arranging a meeting with your prospective in-laws to seal the bargain. By contrast, true love stories, those celebrated in chivalric romances, were rarefied exceptions. Knights and ladies professed love at tournaments, wrote sonnets in secret, and exchanged tokens beneath moonlit ramparts. Yet these tales were the stuff of courtly poetry, not daily life for most. For peasants, romance was secondary to survival. Their passions were tempered by the urgent demands of sowing seeds and harvesting barley. When they did steal a moment, it was as precious as a full barrel of ale after a long winter. So, if you've ever romanticized medieval intimacy, think again. It was an arena of cramped spaces, legal oversight, liturgical calendars, and clerical quizzes, not a romantic escape. Pleasure existed, sure, but it was often overshadowed by rules, rituals, and the need to keep the church and the neighbors from breathing down your neck. And yet, through it all, medieval men and women found ways to express desire, carve out stolen moments, and rebel against the strictures of their time. Medieval medicine was built on a shaky foundation of Galenic theory, the idea that our bodies were governed by four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and that health depended on their delicate balance. Sex, being a physical act, naturally fell under this rubric. If your humors were out of whack, too cold, too wet, too dry, you might need a little assistance. Cue the herbalists, apothecaries, and local wise women with vials of crushed roots, petals, and animal parts. Some concoctions were harmless flower infusions. Others included powdered beetle shells or ground mummified human remains. Yes, really. Let's start with the gentler stuff. Roses were everywhere, in gardens, liturgies, and love spells. Rose petals steeped in wine were believed to warm the blood and stoke desire. Lovers might press petals between sheets or toss them into a bath to set the mood. Likewise, sandalwood incense was thought to awaken the senses. A handful of shavings burned in a brazier could cloak a bedroom in fragrant smoke that hinted at passion rising. Then there were the wilder recommendations. Citron root, also known as love and idleness, promised to make the shyer spouse more forward. It was chewed or brewed into a bitter tea that was reputed to loosen inhibitions, though punishments for public intoxication and unseemly behavior could be swift. Mugwort, on the other hand, earned its reputation as a potent aphrodisiac despite its more common use as a menstrual regulator. Legends told of lovers slipping mugwort into each other's pockets or clothing, believing its scent would kindle longing at a distance. But medieval herbalism wasn't all romantic strolls through hedgerows. Some recipes veered into the downright grotesque. Ground coral, believed to preserve the sexual vigor of the elderly, often showed up in marriage manuals alongside pearls and ambergris. These costly ingredients were reserved for nobility and for those who could stomach swilling a mouthful of gritty powder before bedtime. Wealthy couples took comfort in the idea that money could buy desire, even as servants snickered behind their backs. A far more sinister brew involved Spanish fly, a pulverized beetle whose active ingredient could inflame the urinary tract and produce intense irritation mistaken for arousal. In small doses, it was thought to awaken desire. In larger doses, it could lead to excruciating pain, paralysis, or death. Court gossip attributed several mysterious deaths to overzealous use of Spanish fly as a love potion. Yet its reputation endured, passed along in rhyme and rumor. Women seeking to increase their fertility or smooth conception often turned to cinnamon, ginger, and nutmeg, warming spices that traveled from the east at great expense. A pinch in porridge or a dash in mead promised to prepare the womb for pregnancy. But these spices were expensive, leading to lucrative trade and inspiring sea voyages in search of the fabled spice islands. The link between desire, conception, and commerce meant that love potions helped fuel global exploration as much as they fueled bedroom activity. Folk medicine took even stranger turns in rural areas. Animal parts, testicles of the hare, powdered bone of the stag, were ground into salves or worn in sachets. A peasant's trick involved tying the dew-filled petals of a white lily to the bedpost under a new moon to ensure a loving union. If that failed, some resorted to charms, a lock of hair tied with a red ribbon, a whispered incantation over a well, even an egg rolled over the body to absorb sterility. Eggs were then buried at crossroads, believed to break barriers to conception. Witchcraft accusations often sprang from these practices. A woman or man with extensive herbal knowledge could find themselves accused of using sorcery to meddle with fertility or seduce unwilling partners. Trials for witchcraft sometimes centered on unnatural love potions or ointments said to render men helpless in love. Ironically, some accused witches argued that their remedies were simply folk cures passed down through generations, until the local priest or magistrate decided otherwise. Monasteries and convents harbored their own underground pharmacopoeia. Behind closed doors, some monks experimented with potent herbal distillations, aqua vitae, or water of life, that was essentially medieval alcohol. Mixed with elixirs of pomegranate and saffron, it served both as a medicinal tonic and a libido booster. Of course, intoxicating spirits could cloud judgment and occasionally lead to scandalous behavior that required yet another round of confession. Let's not forget the role of food. Feast days featured hearty dishes with secret ingredients, roasted game spiced with cloves and pepper, thick broths infused with dates and honey, pies containing exotic treacle made from sugar cane. All these culinary delights were believed to heat the body and prime it for passion. Bakers occasionally sold love tarts in market squares, pastries flavored with dubious aphrodisiacs. If nothing else, shared laughter over their peculiar taste might spark a more heartfelt connection. But homegrown remedies weren't always safe. Some households kept a physic garden behind the dwelling, a tangle of herbs that served as both medicine chest and love laboratory. A mislabeled plant, deadly nightshade for eggplant, wolfsbane for parsley, could turn a steamy night into tragedy. Records from 14th century herbals recount accidental poisonings blamed on overenthusiastic experimentation, a husband trying to revive his waning vigor, a wife desperate to conceive again battling grief of prior miscarriages. Medical professionals, those formerly trained at burgeoning universities in Paris, Bologna, and Salerno, moved to regulate these practices. Physicians wrote treatises condemning unlicensed herbalists and decrying the misuse of violent medicines. They distinguished between venereal and natural humors, condemning any attempt to stir the former artificially. Yet these scholars were often more interested in the theory of humors than the actual lives of common folk. leaving a gap between academic disdain and popular practice. Meanwhile, urban apothecaries sold elixirs in glass bottles sealed with wax, their labels adorned with astrological symbols. Planetary influences governed the potency of herbs. Parsley harvested under Mars's alignment for virility, lavender picked under Venus for romance. Clients consulted astrologers for the perfect moment to prepare a potion, an expensive and elaborate ritual. The combination of medieval astrology, commerce, and carnal need created a vivid marketplace of desire, complete with scientific-sounding jargon and poetic promises. Even the clergy tinkered with these recipes. Some pious monks produced herbal compendia intended for legitimate medical use, only to find their manuscripts co-opted by laypeople seeking erotic thrills. Church authorities struggled to police the distribution of amatory charms, issuing edicts against abusive filters, while simultaneously prescribing herbs for genuine gynecological ailments. The tension between spiritual purity and bodily health played out in countless ecclesiastical debates. Through it all, the medieval bedroom remained a laboratory of trial and error. Lovers mingled folklore with scientific trappings, blending superstition, faith, and empirical observation. When a concoction backfired, the foolish were blamed. When it succeeded, the apothecaries collected the profits. Trust in tradition and word of mouth outweighed printed guides, which were rare and expensive. Recipes spread by travelers' tales and whispered secrets at market stalls, forming a patchwork of regional variations. So what can we learn from these medieval love potions? First, desire has always been a universal impulse, transcending centuries. Second, human ingenuity often veered toward both healing and harm simultaneously. And finally, the search for an edge in romance, whether through herbs, charms, or cosmic timing, reflects our timeless hope that love can be controlled, bottled, or purchased. When it came to bringing new life into the world, medieval Europe was a battleground of hope, superstition, and sheer terror. Pregnancy was treated as a fragile state of cosmic balance. Too much excitement could send you into premature labor, too little food could starve the baby, and the slightest misstep, say, lifting a bucket of water or seeing a sow farrow her piglets, might doom your unborn child. Women relied on a cadre of midwives, local, wise women, and sometimes even neighboring relatives to guide them through the 9 months and the final, life-threatening ordeal of birth itself. Midwives occupied a curious place in society. They were usually older women whose own childbearing days were behind them and whose reputations had been forged in the fires of countless deliveries. Their tools were simple: herbs, unbleached linen, a wooden birthing chair sometimes called a stool of ease, and an unshakable nerve. They knew which herbs, like borage to strengthen the womb or mugwort to ease labor pains, could coax a baby into the world. But they also carried the know-how for emergency procedures, cutting a dangerous cord, soothing a mother's fever with cooling poultices of rosemary and violets, engaging the baby's position by gentle palpation. Still, every birth was a gamble. Estimates suggest maternal mortality hovered between 1% and 2% per birth, but that small percentage compounded over multiple pregnancies. You might lose one in every 100 mothers, but after 10 or a dozen births, the odds were grim. Babies fared even worse. Neonatal mortality could spike as high as 30%. A woman might endure years of uneventful pregnancies only to perish in a final, catastrophic labor, her life extinguished by infection or a hemorrhage before the midwife could call for prayers to Saint Margaret, the patron saint of childbirth. Contraception was no exact science, and often not much of one at all. Church doctrine condemned any attempt to thwart procreation, but desperate couples still whispered about folk methods. Some recommended coitus interruptus, withdrawal, which was known simply as the old dancing trick. Others crafted pessaries from soft sponges soaked in mixtures of vinegar, rue, or pennyroyal oil, inserting them before intercourse to ward off conception. Pennyroyal, however, was notoriously toxic. A drop too many, and the woman risked convulsions or fatal kidney damage. Rue, on the other hand, carried the stigma of witchcraft, with its acrid scent and reputation for inducing abortions. Abortifacients lurked in every cottage garden. Black hellebore root, known as devil's apple, was boiled into broth that caused violent uterine contractions. Tansy, chewed raw or brewed into tea, served a similar purpose. Wise women offered these brews to clients who feared they couldn't support another child or who desperately needed to conceal an out-of-wedlock pregnancy. The risk? A clandestine abortion gone wrong meant sepsis, organ failure, or a public scandal if the midwife were discovered. Many midwives kept their hearth fires burning late into the night, ready to perform last-ditch procedures, yet they always knew that too many emergencies could lead to accusations of murder or sorcery. The law and the church cast a long shadow over reproductive care. Ecclesiastical courts prosecuted midwives and women who performed abortions as though they were violent criminals. Penalties ranged from penance in the parish church, standing barefoot in the snow while reciting prayers, to hefty fines or banishment. In extreme cases, midwives accused of illicit abortions faced torture, their reputation shredded in front of neighbors. Yet these courts often lacked clear evidence. A bruised woman or a stillborn infant might be enough to condemn a practitioner. The fear of punishment drove many midwives to operate underground, altering their routines and forging secret pacts with families who swore to protect them. In some regions, birthing inns emerged as semi-legal sanctuaries. Located on the edges of towns or along pilgrimage routes, these inns promised privacy and discretion. Couples paid a premium for separate rooms, rudimentary beds, and a midwife's full attention. The inn's walls were said to be insulated with straw bales and heavy tapestries to muffle cries and gossip alike. Candlelight flickered over rough wooden tables where herbal concoctions simmered. The host might be a retired midwife herself or a sympathetic former nun who had left the convent under scandalous circumstances. Birthing inns were risky ventures. Some were raided by church officials, but they offered a slim chance of dignity and safety. Runaway midwives sometimes fled persecution, traveling under assumed names and leaving behind warning signs carved into doorposts. A small cross with 2 dots beneath it meant, "Shelter a midwife at risk." These clandestine networks shared knowledge through coded manuscripts, healing recipes scribbled in Latin disguised by innocuous marginalia about gardening or livestock. One famous 15th century text, the Book of St. Hildegard, circulated in fragments among women who valued its detailed remedies for morning sickness, breech births, and postpartum fevers. Copying it by hand was painstaking work, but it preserved crucial information that male physicians either ignored or actively suppressed. Men's involvement in childbirth was minimal and often unwelcome. Male physicians, schooled in universities, were prohibited from attending births because of the indecency of viewing a naked woman in labor. Their textbooks offered theoretical guidance, diagrams of fetal positions, lectures on the properties of womb heat, and instructions for using forceps, which few possessed. But practical midwifery remained women's domain. Only in dire emergencies did a surgeon get called in to perform crude operations, like craniotomy to save the mother at the cost of the fetus. These procedures were rare but horrifying, no room for sentiment when survival was on the line. After the baby arrived, the lying-in period began. Customs varied, but a new mother typically observed 30 days of confinement, attended by female relatives and a gossip midwife. Meals were carefully curated, rich broths to replenish lost blood, barley water to soothe the gut, and sweetened almond milk to boost milk production. The mother lay on her back, swathed in linen, while visitors brought gifts, clothes for the baby, small coins, or boxes of spiced cakes. This spectacle served 2 purposes. It allowed the mother to recuperate and signal to the community that a new member had joined the parish. Baptism usually took place within a few days, performed at home or in the local church, lest the infant succumb to illness before being welcomed into the fold. Yet not all births ended in joy. Stillbirths and neonatal deaths were mourned with quiet rituals, the body washed, dressed in white, and buried in unconsecrated ground or at the edge of the churchyard. No elaborate funeral for the tiniest souls, but families often placed small tokens of hope for a future pregnancy, at roadside shrines dedicated to Saint Gerard, a 12th century bishop invoked against miscarriage. Through these cycles of conception, birth, and loss, medieval women cultivated resilience and solidarity. Sisterhoods formed in towns, and formal guilds of midwives, wise women, and recently widowed nurses who pooled resources, shared knowledge, and offered emotional support. They held monthly water gatherings where women discussed menstrual troubles, pregnancy scares, and the latest herbal discoveries. These gatherings were frowned upon by church authorities, who likened them to pagan covens, but they persisted as lifelines in a world where official medical care was both expensive and remote. Religion's role remained paradoxical. On the one hand, prayers to saints like Mary, Saint Anne, and Saint Margaret formed the backbone of birthing rituals. Women wore scapulars emblazoned with holy images during labor, and midwives recited incantations that mingled Christian verses with pre-Christian charms. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, Sanct Gerardus, Adiuvami. On the other hand, church doctrine condemned any attempt to manipulate fertility or life, branding contraception and abortion as mortal sins. This duality forced women to negotiate between spiritual fidelity and physical necessity, often in the hushed secrecy of their own homes. By the late Middle Ages, the advent of printed books began to shift the landscape. Manuals like the Trotula series, originally compiled in Salerno, were reprinted in vernacular languages, making midwifery knowledge more accessible if you could afford the price. Clandestine pamphlets on birth control circulated in markets, promising simple recipes for pessaries that block seed or potions that cleanse the womb. Yet literacy rates remained low, and printed texts coexisted with oral traditions, each reinforcing the other in a complex tapestry of knowledge transmission. Despite the risks, medieval families understood that controlling fertility was a matter of survival. Too many mouths to feed meant hunger and disease. Too few children threatened the continuation of land and lineage. They improvised with what they had: herbal teas, knitted womb belts, and the time-honored rhythm method dictated by the Church's calendar of forbidden days. Their successes and failures were recorded in the margins of prayer books, in the whispered advice of grandmothers, and in the harsh lessons learned by each new generation of mothers. In the crucible of childbirth and contraception, we see the ingenuity and courage of medieval women and midwives. They stood at the intersection of science, magic, and faith, forging strategies to bring life safely into the world, or to prevent it when circumstances demanded. They navigated a world where every pregnancy was a leap of faith, every birth a testament to survival, and every remedy a potent blend of hope and hazard. Their stories remind us that, even in the most challenging circumstances, people seek control over their bodies and destinies, sometimes succeeding, sometimes paying a high price, but never surrendering their drive to shape the course of life itself. Prostitution was woven into the fabric of medieval towns like a stubborn thread, unwelcome yet impossible to erase. Brothels sat cheek by jowl with bakeries and blacksmiths, their narrow doorways marked by painted signs of naked figures or the humble donkey, symbol of base desire. Town councils tolerated these houses of ill repute for practical reasons. Licensed prostitutes filled the beds of travelers, spared respectable women from unwanted advances, and kept venereal diseases contained within a known population. Men paid a nightly fee, often as little as a loaf of bread and a jug of ale, for access to curtained cubicles barely large enough for a straw mattress and a chamber pot. Clients ranged from barefoot laborers seeking relief after a grueling day's work to robed priests who slipped in under the cover of darkness, convinced their sins could vanish with the breaking of dawn. Streetwalkers were the most precarious of all. In cities like Paris and Florence, trottoirs bustled with women offering services in plain sight. Their attire, red or scarlet sashes tied around the waist, signaled availability as clearly as any signpost. Yet the same streets echoed with the denunciations of moral reformers who blamed municipal brothels for society's ills. Crackdowns waxed and waned with political currents. One year, authorities collected fines from madams and regulated conduct. The next, they burned windows of suspected houses, scattering terrified prostitutes into alleys and forcing them underground. For the most vulnerable, this cat-and-mouse game meant sudden unemployment, violence from predatory clients, and the constant fear of arrest or worse. Beyond the brothels lay a world of clandestine passion, lovers who danced on the edge of sin and scandal to enjoy a stolen tryst. Noble women, chafing under arranged marriages, sometimes sought refuge in secret rendezvous with knights. They whispered clandestine sonnets beneath tapestry folds, exchanged tokens hidden inside locked coffer, and slipped through garden gates under the cover of night. Their lovers fashioned false keys to study chambers, bribed guards, and even carved hidden staircases behind bookcases to facilitate forbidden meetings. For these aristocratic couples, love was both a thrill and a crime. Discovery could result in humiliation, exile, or a duel fought at dawn between cuckolded husbands and brazen paramours. But not all transgressions were born of romantic longing. Sodomy, a catch-all term for same-sex relations and other unnatural acts, invited the harshest condemnations. Medieval law codes, influenced by biblical injunctions and papal decrees, declared sodomy a capital crime. Church courts and secular tribunals collaborated to root out buggers, as the English called them, often employing brutal torture to extract confessions. Despite the dangers, historical records reveal pockets of tolerance and vibrant underground cultures. In ports like Marseille and London, seafarers formed tight-knit circles, sharing fleeting liaisons aloft the rigging or in darkened taverns. Scholars at universities whispered about tribadism among educated women living in cloistered colleges. The tension between official persecution and private practice underscored the complex reality of medieval sexuality. Desire persisted even where the law sought to erase it. Venereal disease, lumped under the umbrella of French pox or simply the pox, spread silently through Europe, leaving disfiguring sores and social ostracism in its wake. Physicians and barber surgeons offered treatments ranging from trepanning of ulcers to purgative concoctions, often composed of mercury, which left patients with tremors, tooth loss, and horrifying salivation. Patients paid handsomely for these tortures, believing that only the foulest medicine could cure such a deadly affliction. Public pox houses quarantined the desperately ill, their skeletal figures scratching through barred windows, screaming for mercy as wounds festered. Yet knowledge of contagion was rudimentary. People blamed bad air, divine wrath, or the erotic arts of foreign women, Spanish, French, or Moorish, whose reputed evil eyes and seductive perfumery allegedly spread the disease like a weapon. Alongside punitive measures, medieval communities developed rudimentary public health regulations. Prostitutes in some French cities underwent periodic health inspections by city physicians. Their brothels received official seals certifying no visible signs of disease. Clients, too ashamed to report infections, sought discreet treatments from apothecaries who dispensed powders of powdered mummia or balsam of Peru. Local governments sometimes enacted ordinances to separate clean and unclean streets, ensuring diseased individuals lived at a distance from markets and parish churches. It was a fraught attempt at containment, hampered by limited understanding of transmission and the social stigma that drove sufferers into hiding. Courtly love, the idealized, often platonic devotion celebrated by troubadours, presented an aspirational vision of intimacy that stood in stark contrast to grubby realities. Knights composed elaborate poems to married ladies, praising their beauty and virtue from afar, pledging feats of chivalry to earn a single glance. These verses circulated in manuscript collections, performed before assembled courts where audience members drank spiced wine and pondered the nature of true love. Yet this form of love was typically symbolic, emphasizing longing over consummation, adoration over physical union. It offered a socially acceptable outlet for desire, elevating romantic yearning to a spiritual plane divorced from fleshly need. The aristocratic fixation on lineage and inheritance turned marriage into a strategic alliance rather than an act of affection. Marriages were brokered by families, their contracts detailing dowries, jointure lands, and succession rights. Love was an extra, if fortunate, byproduct. Some exceptionally devoted couples, like Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II, are recorded as sharing genuine affection, exchanging love letters and gifts. Most, however, navigated a transactional landscape where sex was duty and pleasure, if it came, was secondary. The Church reinforced this view, teaching that marital sex, limited to the missionary position and performed for procreation, should be unadorned by eroticism. Yet human passion, as always, found ways to flicker in marginalia. Drawings of embracing couples hidden in prayer books, bawdy jokes scratched into castle walls, and illicit poems traded under candlelight. In rural villages, communal activities shaped sexual mores as much as church councils. Harvest festivals, May Day celebrations, and saints' feast days allowed for loosened social constraints. Young people paired off for dances, paired off for courtship, and sometimes paired off for one-night encounters, all sanctioned by the collective revelry. Folkloric customs, such as book riding or hobby horse processions, carried clear sexual undertones. Adults donned animal costumes, frolicked through fields, and selected partners in playful mock weddings. These customs, blending pagan survivals with community bonds, let villagers step outside daily strictures and indulge in erotic play before retreating to pious routines once the sun rose. Town ordinances tried to regulate these carnival-like freedoms. Some cities forbade kissing or intimate dancing in market squares, imposing fines or public shaming for violators. Other places embraced limited license, recognizing its social value in cementing bonds and offering an outlet for youthful energy. The tension between regulation and release highlights a medieval truth. Sexuality was both feared and necessary, subject to control yet integral to community life. By the 15th century, the Black Death's demographic shock reverberated through sexual norms. With so many dead, push came to shove, communal pressures eased as villages begged for mouths to feed and hands to work the fields. Clergy found themselves watering down penances and granting dispensations for marriage ages previously deemed too young. Orphaned children were paired off to ensure the survival of estates. These desperate times fostered arrangements where love and lust were subservient to survival, further blurring lines between duty and desire. Across centuries, medieval attitudes towards sex evolved in fits and starts, shaped by plague, politics, and changing theological currents. Renaissance humanists began to rebuke the Church's prudishness, advocating a more natural view of the body's pleasures. Yet their voices echoed into a world still scarred by centuries of suspicion. It took the scientific revolution and the advent of print to truly shift perceptions, but even then, the shadows of medieval strictures lingered in social etiquette and moralistic tracts. So, what can we take from this sprawling tapestry of medieval sexuality? First, that human desire refuses containment, surging through every crack in walls, every loophole in law, every whisper behind closed doors. Second, that societies have long struggled to balance regulation and freedom, health and sin, duty and pleasure. And third, that the medieval world, despite its straw-strewn beds and liturgical calendars, nurtured a rich, complex sexual culture, one that informs our own modern negotiations of intimacy, morality, and community. In the end, medieval sex was messy, contradictory, and thoroughly human, rife with attempts to control it and equally marked by brilliant acts of resistance. Whether through clandestine aphrodisiacs, secret midwives, coded love letters, or bodyfolk traditions, medieval people shaped their sexuality with as much passion and creativity as we do today. And that, perhaps, is the real scandal, not the rules they tried to impose, but the irrepressible spirit of desire that always found a way through. Tonight, we're stepping into a world where your modern aspirin would seem like witchcraft, and a priest might double as your surgeon. Prepare to discover the astonishing, spooky, and sometimes downright brutal practices of ancient Egyptian medicine. Imagine you're walking down a bustling street in Thebes around 1500 BCE. You pass rows of mud brick houses, marketplaces overflowing with grain, and priests chanting in the towering pylons of the temple. One of those priests isn't just praying to the gods. He's diagnosing illnesses, setting broken bones, and prescribing potions made from insects and incense. Welcome to the world of ancient Egyptian medicine, where myth and science intertwined like the intricate hieroglyphs on temple walls. Egyptian healers believed the body was threaded with channels, called medu, carrying air, tears, blood, urine, and even sperm. Disease struck when these medu became blocked or unbalanced. You might expect a physician to grab a scalpel, but instead he'd reach for a cold compress, a leech, or perhaps a spicy mixture of cumin and honey to clear the pathways. If that failed, it was time to call on the magicians, ritual specialists who chanted spells to persuade the local deity, Sekhmet, goddess of healing and destruction, to restore equilibrium. Our main sources? Medical papyri like the Ebers Papyrus, circa 1550 BCE, and the Edwin Smith Surgical Papyrus, circa 1600 BCE. The Ebers Scroll is a 20-meter treatise brimming with 700 remedies, frankincense to staunch bleeding, crocodile dung pillows to cure baldness, even pounded scarab beetles for bladder trouble. Meanwhile, the Edwin Smith text is less mystical and more surgical. It classifies 48 injuries, explains examination techniques, and advises when to operate, and when to walk away and let nature take its course. Together, These documents reveal a medical system that balanced empirical observation with deeply held spiritual beliefs. Let's meet the cast of characters. On one side, you have the SWNW, the physicians, often temple priests trained in anatomy through embalmings. These SWNW learned from observing mummies, noting how organs were removed and treated. They knew that the heart was central to life, so they left it in the body, even though they tossed the brain out through the nose. They performed trepanations, drilling holes in skulls, to relieve pressure or exorcise evil spirits, with surprisingly high survival rates for the era. On the other side were the Sao, the sorcerers who wielded magical wands, incantation bowls, and protective amulets. A child plagued by a mysterious cough might receive a garlic necklace for warding off demons, while a woman in labor would recite a birth incantation to Tarit, the hippopotamus-headed goddess protecting mothers and infants. Ceremonies could last all night, culminating in the burning of herbs to purify the air, an early form of aromatherapy. But let's zero in on a day in the life of an Egyptian healer. A patient arrives at the temple of Amenhotep's mortuary precinct with a nasty wound from a chariot accident. The SWNW greets him, notes the location, checks for swelling and fever, and refers to the surgical papyrus. If the wound is gaping, bind with fresh meat to staunch the flow. If the edges are jagged, trim and stitch with linen thread. That linen thread? It was soaked in honey, a natural antiseptic and antibiotic, believe it or not. After stitching, the physician stuffs the wound with moldy bread, risking infection but hoping the penicillium in the bread will curb bacterial growth. Then comes a poultice of cinnamon and frankincense to ease pain and reduce inflammation. The surgeon writes his findings on papyrus, sealing the prescription with the symbol of Sekhmet. Meanwhile, upstairs in the temple, the Sao prepares a companion ritual. He lights Kifi incense, a heady blend of raisins, myrrh, juniper berries, and reeds, to appease the spirits that caused the accident. He chants the tale of the two brothers, invoking two deities who restored a broken heart, and douses the patient's chest with sacred water from the Nile. The two approaches, medical and magical, operate side by side, each adding a layer of reassurance in a world where illness was often a death sentence. Beyond trauma care, Egyptians tackled chronic disease with surprisingly sophisticated methods. Eye infections, rampant near the shimmering waters, were treated with milk from mothers of male infants, a formula believed to carry potent life force. Hemorrhoids, a mixture of honey and natron, a natural salt, would be inserted as a suppository and bound with a padded bandage. Parasites, a paste of pounded garlic and juniper oil applied topically. Worst case, the healer fed you a little bit of arsenic-laced bread to purge intestinal worms. It was dangerous, but sometimes effective, an early example of toxic therapy. Childbirth in ancient Egypt also reflected this dualism. Expectant mothers visited the temple of Bes, the dwarf god of fertility, carrying an ivory amulet carved with his grinning face. If labor stalled, a midwife might massage the mother's belly with oils of castor and cedar, accompanied by a chant, Bes, bring forth the babe with laughter and ease. Archaeological finds in workers' villages around the pyramids reveal simple birthing beds and ceramic jars that once held medicinal ointments. Maternal mortality hovered around 10%, a horrifying number by modern standards, but comparatively lower than many later cultures. And then there's dentistry. Yes, they drilled teeth. Papyrus fragments describe using carbonized linen fibers as floss, mint leaf poultices for gum pain, and even rudimentary fillings made from beeswax mixed with powdered malachite. One tomb painting shows a physician holding a dental hook, ready to extract a painful molar. While dental abscesses were often fatal, these early dentists understood that relieving a toothache could save a life. Lesson learned through bitter experience. It wasn't all success stories, though. Leprosy, tuberculosis, and parasitic skin diseases defied treatment. Physicians offered ointments of stinking frankincense mixed with fat, but the aromatic therapy rarely stopped disfiguring lesions. Leprous individuals were often sent to cities of purification, isolated settlements where they donned white robes and carried cedar wands to warn others. The community believed they were cursed, but archaeological evidence shows these leper colonies had basic medical facilities, a muddy courtyard for bathing and nearby shrines for daily prayers. By the New Kingdom, circa 1550 to 1070 BCE, the medical profession became more organized. Tomb inscriptions boast of doctors who served pharaohs. Peshet, the earliest recorded female physician, supervised midwives and taught anatomy, her title carved into the walls of her mastaba. Hesiare, chief physician to Djoser, wore a wig of tight curls and held a staff inscribed with healing symbols. Their prestige rivaled scribes and priest-kings, evidence that healing was a noble, scholarly pursuit. Training wasn't standardized like modern medical school, but aspiring physicians apprenticed under master healers for years. They memorized thousands of spells, learned to identify herbs in the temple garden, and practiced on imitation wounds carved into limestone blocks. The best ones earned divine approval. Statues show them kneeling before Thoth, god of writing and medicine, receiving the gift of knowledge in the form of a scroll. Perhaps the most fascinating legacy is how Egyptian medicine spread. After Alexander the Great conquered Egypt and Ptolemaic rulers reigned, Greek scholars translated medical papyri into Greek. Hospitals, called iatria, emerged in Alexandria, blending Egyptian, Greek, and later Roman practices. The Hippocratic texts, influenced by Egyptian teachings on anatomy and diet, laid the foundation for Western medicine for centuries. Even today, some herbal remedies, willow bark for pain, castor oil for constipation, trace their roots to prescriptions scribbled by scribes 2 millennia ago. So let's recap part 1. A world where your surgeon might be a priest, your potion might come from a beetle shell, and a chant might be as crucial as a scalpel. A civilization that observed, documented, and ritualized healing in a way that resonates even now. Ancient Egypt didn't just build pyramids. They built the earliest hospitals and pharmaceutical traditions. In part 2, we'll plunge deeper into the Ebers Papyrus, dissect its strangest recipes, from crocodile dung poultices to dung-infused eye paints, and assess which treatments were outright dangerous, which were surprisingly effective, and how this treasure trove of knowledge shaped subsequent generations. But for now, rest easy knowing that the next time you pop a pill, you're standing on the shoulders of a civilization that treated medicine as both a sacred art and a scientific craft. Let's plunge straight into the heart of Egyptian pharmacology, the Ebers Papyrus. This 20-meter scroll reads like a hallucinogenic grocery list, 700-plus recipes, each promising cures for ailments we still battle today. Some feel disturbingly medieval, others eerily prescient. We'll sort the gold from the grit. First up, digestive potions. Egyptians believed the gut was the seat of illness. Bloating, cramps, indigestion, all blamed on earthy humors clogging the meadow. One recipe prescribes a paste of black pepper, galbanum resin, and lentil flour mixed with beer. The capsaicin-like compounds in pepper would stimulate gastric juices, while the beer's yeasts might aid digestion. Not bad for 1500 BCE. Contrast that with the more alarming crocodile fat blended with natron and willow bark, then wrapped in figs and left to ferment. The idea was that crocodile fat soothed intestinal spasms, but the risk of rancid oils and botulism makes this a hard pass. Dermatological remedies dominate a huge section. Egyptians prized smooth skin and treated rashes with poultices of castor oil and pounded ochre. Ochre's iron oxide has mild antiseptic properties, and castor oil soothes inflammation. Again, not far from modern dermatology. But Egyptian mud mask also called for crushed beetle shells and lead compounds. Lead-based cosmetics were fashionable, yet toxic. Prolonged use could lead to lead poisoning, hair loss, and neurological issues. The Egyptians unknowingly danced on a knife's edge between beauty ritual and brutal harm. Eye treatments in the Ebers Papyrus earned a notorious reputation. Eye diseases were rampant along the Nile: microbial infections, conjunctivitis, trachoma. One prescription pairs breast milk with ground barley and mummy, Powdered human or animal remains, applied as a salve. The lactic acid in milk has mild antibacterial effects, but mummy powder, rich in calcium phosphate, might simply dry the eyelid. More fantastical is the bull's gall droplet dropped into red, itchy eyes to expel the devil of sight. Bull's bile contains bile acids that irritate tissue, more exorcism than medicine. Let's talk parasites, nematodes, tapeworms, you name it. Egyptians brewed teas from pomegranate bark and myrrh gum. Pomegranate contains alkaloids with antiparasitic activity, and myrrh is somewhat antimicrobial. Women suffering from threadworms would drink this decoction over days. When symptoms persisted, they turned to grain ferment laced with henbane seeds, a recipe guaranteed to cause hallucinations, heart palpitations, and possible fatal toxicity. It might purge worms through induced vomiting, but at what cost? Gynecological prescriptions fill entire columns. To increase fertility, women consumed honey cakes spiked with galangal and fenugreek, spices that boost circulation and may have estrogen-like effects. For menstrual pain, a suppository of date juice mixed with crocus petals promised relief. These ingredients contain antioxidants and anti-inflammatory compounds, possibly easing cramps. But abortifacient recipes cross a darker line. A blend of pennyroyal oil and cedar resin inserted vaginally to provoke uterine contractions. Pennyroyal, toxic in overdose, can damage the liver and kidneys. Cedar resin causes severe irritation. These methods speak to desperation as much as ingenuity. Next, respiratory illnesses. Papyrus texts recommend inhaling fumes from heated incense cones made of frankincense, myrrh, juniper oil, and dried mandrake root. Frankincense and myrrh smoke have anti-inflammatory effects in the airways. Juniper oil fights pathogens. Mandrake contains scopolamine, which can reduce secretions but also induce dizziness. Used carefully, these inhalations could ease congestion. Abuse, however, brings delirium and respiratory depression. Now, let's pull back and evaluate. Which Egyptian prescriptions stand up to modern scrutiny? Many plant-based remedies, honey, willow bark, frankincense, contain genuine bioactive compounds. The concept of antisepsis, through honey's hydrogen peroxide release and moldy bread's penicillium spores, hints at empirical wisdom. Trepanation for intracranial injuries, performed with bronze drills, often survived infection better than untreated skull fractures. Their use of linen sutures soaked in honey parallels modern surgical techniques. But this wisdom was entangled with superstition. Rituals mattered as much as ingredients. A poultice might cure a wound not because of its pharmacology, but because the patient believed the chant and amulet would summon the healing power of Sekhmet. Magic and medicine were inseparable. Practitioners knew this synergy boosted confidence and compliance. Early examples of placebo effect harnessed by temple authorities. This blend of science and sorcery shaped subsequent medical traditions. When Greeks came to Alexandria, they found scrolls with descriptions of anatomy gleaned from embalming workshops. They codified these observations into the Hippocratic corpus. Roman physicians borrowed Egyptian pharmacopoeias wholesale. Galen cites willow bark centuries later. Even in medieval Europe, monastic infirmaries used imported Egyptian recipes, mixing them with local herbal lore. But let's not romanticize. Not every Egyptian healer was a Paracelsus before his time. Many treatments did more harm than good. Mercury compounds, used for skin ulcers, eventually caused mercurialism, tremors, gingivitis, personality changes. Vitamin-based plasters hardened into carcinogenic tar. Some prescriptions called for animal excrement in wound dressings, a recipe for tetanus and sepsis. Moreover, access was unequal. Temple physicians served nobles and priests. Commoners relied on village healers and wandering charm singers. Their improvised remedies varied regionally. The Fayum marshes boasted papyrus-based disinfectants. Desert communities prized frankincense from Punt. These local variations enriched the corpus but also introduced quackery. Charlatans sold elixir of the desert that was little more than colored water. What about surgical instruments? Bronze scalpels, knives, forceps, cautery rods. Egyptians crafted tools with precision rivaling modern sets. Archaeological digs reveal surgical toolkits in tombs, complete with storage chests lined in gold leaf. Yet surgery remained a last resort. Admonitions in the Edwin Smith Papyrus warn, "Do not operate on the goddess." In other words, avoid brain and heart wounds when possible, and let prayer do the rest. Education and professionalization evolved in parallel. Training meant apprenticeship at a temple school, memorizing spells and recipes by rote. Literacy rates were low, so oral transmission dominated. A master physician might pass scroll fragments to a select pupil, secrets to be kept within guild-like circles. By contrast, scribes copied texts for non-medical purposes, ensuring that medical writings survived through political upheaval. Let's turn to practical legacies. Many Egyptian remedies persist in folk medicine. Castor oil remains a laxative. Frankincense extracts show promise in rheumatoid arthritis trials. Honey's antiseptic properties are harnessed in modern wound dressings. Researchers isolating active compounds often start by tracing ingredients back to papyrus texts. Yet few of the bizarre or toxic recipes survive in use, thankfully. Medical ethics moved away from trial by poison. What about hospitals? The concept of a dedicated care facility took shape in Egypt's temple precincts. Patients entering the precinct of Imhotep in Memphis underwent triage. Urgent trauma went to the SW&W, chronic care to the South Wing, and mental afflictions to a separate house of purgation, where dietary regimens prevailed. These proto-hospitals were communal spaces offering shelter, food, and treatment, a far cry from solitary torture wards in later medieval Europe. By Ptolemaic times, hospitals in Alexandria evolved into centers of learning and research. Physicians treated patients by day and lectured by night, transcribing Greek-Egyptian syncretic texts. Galen studied there. Celsus translated Egyptian botanical names into Greek. This cross-pollination propelled Western medicine forward, even as the Roman Empire absorbed Egypt's medical traditions into its own bureaucratic system. So here's the takeaway from Part 2. Ancient Egyptian medicine was neither pure magic nor unblemished science, but a dynamic fusion that laid groundwork for millennia. Its successes, antiseptic honey, empirical surgery, nascent pharmacology, dazzle us today. Its failures, lead cosmetics, toxic abortifacients, reliance on magic, remind us how far we've come. The temple as hospital, the priest as physician, the papyrus as pharmaceutical manual. These concepts echo in our own hospitals, doctors' offices, and pharmacies. Next, in Part 3, we'll journey beyond the scrolls to examine how ancient texts traveled across deserts and seas, how medical schools rose and fell, and how the spark of Egyptian innovation ignited the golden ages of Greek, Roman, and Islamic medicine. We'll follow the path of papyrus from Thebes to Baghdad, tracing the evolution of medical knowledge through translations, commentaries, and the dawning of the Renaissance. Stay tuned for a story that spans continents and centuries, and reveals that the pulse of Egyptian medicine still beats in our veins today. As Egyptian medical wisdom left the banks of the Nile, it embarked on an epic journey across deserts, seas, and empires, carried by traders, scholars, and conquerors who recognized that those brittle papyrus scrolls contained secrets worth sharing. Imagine watching a caravan winding through the Sinai, merchants burdened not only with spices and gold, but also with tightly rolled bundles of medical texts. Camels laden with Eber's papyrus fragments trudged through salt flats toward Gaza. Seafaring Greeks slipped surgical treatises into amphorae bound for Alexandria's bustling harbors. By the time Alexander the Great set foot in Egypt in 332 BCE, the fusion of Greek curiosity and Egyptian experience was already underway. In Alexandria's famed Mouseion, Heart Temple, Heart Research Institute, the Egyptian SW&W and Greek physicians found themselves rubbing shoulders for the first time. You can almost hear the debates echoing down columned halls. Your lotus-based soporifics dull the mind, a Greek doctor might scoff, and your mercury salves corrupt the body. the Egyptian could retort. Yet they recognized a shared goal: to understand and alleviate human suffering. Under Ptolemaic patronage, these scholars translated hieroglyphic prescriptions into Greek verse, preserving the Eber's botanical remedies in new alphabets and idioms. They dissected mummies in hidden basements, always with reverence, of course, so that Ptolemy's court physicians could refine anatomical knowledge long before Galen etched his own treatises. Word spread that Alexandria's Iatria, those early hospitals, offered treatments unlike anything known in Athens or Rome. Travelers spoke of wards divided by ailment, one wing for head wounds, where linen bandages still smelled of honey, another for internal maladies, where patients reclined on wooden couches flanked by vases of aromatic oils. A young Athenian nobleman, stricken with a fever after a pitched campaign in the Peloponnese, arrived in a litter only to find himself under the care of both Egyptian priests and Greek medici. He received a dual prescription, a draught of willow bark tea in the morning, and in the evenings, the recited syllables of a Sekhmet hymn whispered over his chest. When he recovered, he returned home with copies of both papyri and Hippocratic volumes, eager to emulate Alexandria's hybrid approach. As Rome's power expanded eastward, Roman physicians eagerly absorbed these innovations. Celsus, author of De Medicina, cited Egyptian dressings for wounded limbs. Pliny the Elder marveled at crocodile dung's supposed astringent powers, though he warned against its odor. Soldiers stationed in Egypt sent medical reports back to Rome, describing the efficacy of frankincense poultices and the puzzling idea of using natron salt to cleanse wounds. In response, Roman military hospitals began embedding linen with honey, anointing soldiers' cuts with a substance as sweet as their victory cakes. Yet this transmission wasn't one way. Greek theories of humors, blood, phlegm, yellow, and black bile, found fertile ground in Egypt's own understanding of bodily fluids, even if their terminology diverged. Egyptian healers added empirical precision. They measured humors by observing urine color in standardized ceramic cups, noting shades from pale straw to dark amber. These diagnostic conventions joined the Hippocratic Code, enriching medical schools from Pergamum to Padua centuries later. When the Western Roman Empire waned and new powers rose, Islamic scholars inherited Alexandria's library treasures, scrolls that survived conquest and conquest in hidden vaults. In Baghdad's House of Wisdom, translators like Hunayn ibn Ishaq meticulously rendered Egyptian Greek medical texts into Arabic. Hunayn compared multiple manuscripts to weed out scribal errors. He corrected a misinterpreted mummy recipe to clarify that the term referred to bitumen resin, not human remains. His colleague Rhazes wrote commentaries denouncing lead cosmetics, but praising honey's antiseptic qualities. Together, they integrated Egyptian remedies into the vast pharmacopoeia of the Islamic Golden Age, which itself would later return to Europe during the Crusades and through Spanish dons translating Arabic into Latin. By the 12th century, European universities in Salerno, Bologna, and Montpellier taught a curriculum that blended Galen, Hippocrates, and the wisdom of ancient Egypt. Medical students chanted mnemonics in Latin, Ebers et Smithus, to memorize which herbs combated which symptoms. They practiced trepanations on ox skulls, mimicking the procedures first outlined on the Edwin Smith scroll. When a plague struck Florence in 1348, city physicians prescribed willow bark infusions and honey poultices, echoing the pharmacological footnotes of Pharos. Renaissance humanists found these traditions both inspiring and, to some extent, limiting. Paracelsus, the maverick Swiss physician, railed against blind adherence to old texts, yet he couldn't deny the empirical successes of certain Egyptian treatments. He distilled frankincense into tinctures and advocated for viridian oil rubbed into joints, and homage to the color of Egyptian malachite used in ancient ointments. Paracelsus's own writings, full of alchemical jargon, still carried the echoes of temple incantations. He believed that medicine was art, magic, and philosophy combined, much as the Egyptians had practiced thousands of years before. Meanwhile, back in Egypt, local practices continued evolving quietly. Coptic monastic infirmaries became repositories for folk remedies. Recipes on palm leaf manuscripts described new flower hybrids cultivated along the Nile Delta. Farmers learned to graft medicinal plants, sage branches onto olive roots, to withstand unpredictable floods. These hybrid species later caught the eye of Ottoman physicians, who added rosewater and saffron to traditional Egyptian formulations, creating Egyptian rose elixir that became a fixture in Ottoman court medicine. Across the Mediterranean, merchants and pilgrims carried vials of these elixirs, sharing them in Venice's spice markets and Andalusian bazaars. The name Egyptian balm became synonymous with exotic luxury, a drop in perfumed baths or a dab behind the ears to ward off melancholy. Writers like Boccaccio and Cervantes reference Nile water as a cure-all, proof that Egyptian medicine's reputation outlasted even its foreign rulers. In modern times, archaeologists have uncovered caches of medical instruments buried with high-status physicians in Saqqara. Bronze scalpels, forceps, even small bronze spoons for measuring powders reveal a dimension of professionalism that belies the primitive label often slapped on ancient cultures. Analysis of residue in pottery jars shows traces of honey, natron, and extracts of myrrh and juniper, chemical signatures that modern labs confirm have antibacterial properties. Trepanation sites on skulls extracted from cemeteries display signs of bone regrowth, indicating some patients survived these daring skull surgeries. Pharmacologists retracing the steps of Egyptian healers isolate active compounds. Boswellic acids from frankincense show promise in fighting inflammation. Papyri prescriptions for antispasmodic teas inspire clinical trials for IBS treatments. Even mummy powder, once a medical oddity, is reinterpreted as a source of calcium phosphate, hinting at bone regeneration potential. Though we never swallow powdered mummies today, the notion that ancient substances hold untapped medical value sparks interdisciplinary research, merging history, chemistry, and pharmacology. Universities now offer courses on the history of medicine where students translate hieroglyphic prescriptions, an exercise in linguistic detective work that often yields new hypotheses about dosage and delivery methods. Museums recreate Egyptian pharmacies complete with replica papyri, clay jars, and mock ritual spaces, allowing visitors to experience the sensory world of incense, chanting, and oil lamp glow. Virtual reality exhibits let you step into a reconstruction of Imhotep's hospital precinct, assign diagnoses to digital patients, and debate whether to prescribe willow bark tea or a protective amulet. The cultural legacy of Egyptian medicine even surfaces in language. Words like pharmacy trace back to the Greek pharmakon, which itself sprang from Egyptian padiaimin, meaning that which is laid in, referring to medicinal pastes. Clinic comes from klein, the Greek word for couch, derived from Egyptian birthing stools, underscoring how deeply these innovations permeate our modern practices. Yet beyond tools, texts, and etymology, the true inheritance lies in a mindset, the integration of observation, documentation, and ritual. Egyptian healers meticulously recorded case outcomes, refined their methods over generations, and respected the psychosomatic interplay between belief and bodily healing. They treated patients not just as bearers of disease, but as bearers of stories, inviting both scientific inquiry and spiritual solace. That holistic vision resonates today in integrative medicine, where acupuncture, herbal therapy, and Western pharmaceuticals coexist in clinics around the world. So as you reach for a glass of water to swallow your next pill, remember the riverbank scribes who first inscribed those formulas on brittle papyrus. Their blend of magic and medicine, empirical flair and ritual reverence, set in motion a cascade of knowledge that spans continents and millennia. Whether you're swabbing a wound with honey-based gel or popping an aspirin made from willow bark extract, you're partaking in a tradition that began under Egyptian sunrises more than 3,000 years ago. The journey continues, And every time a researcher unlocks a new plant compound or rediscovers an ancient remedy, the pulse of Egyptian medicine beats on, reminding us that true healing has always been, and will always be, a human story of curiosity, compassion, and creativity. The legacy of ancient Egyptian medicine didn't end with the fading of dynasties. It flowed downstream into every corner of the globe, carried by itinerant healers, explorers, and scholars who kept those papyrus prescriptions alive. By the time the Arab geographer al-Makdisi penned his works in the 10th century, he described Cairo's Bimaristan hospital system as unparalleled, staffed by physicians who still invoked the names of Sekhmet and Imhotep alongside Allah in their opening invocations. From the dusty halls of medieval Damascus to the candlelit wards of Renaissance Florence, echoes of Egyptian practice resonated in rituals, recipes, and the very architecture of healing spaces. Let's step into a typical medieval Islamic Bimaristan around 1200 CE. Patients recline on raised marble couches swathed in linen, their wounds dressed with honey-soaked bandages. Apothecary shelves hold glass vials of myrrh, frankincense, and Egyptian castor oil, imported along Red Sea trade routes. The chief physician, often trained in Alexandria or Baghdad, begins his rounds not with rote questions, but by examining the patient's pulse, eyes, and tongue, techniques he inherited from the Edwin Smith papyrus blended with Galenic theory. He murmurs a healing prayer, applies a poultice, and then ensures the patient receives nourishing broth infused with cumin and coriander, ingredients that traced their way from Nile Delta gardens to the spice bazaars of Cairo. Meanwhile, Christian monastic infirmaries in 14th century Europe quietly preserved Egyptian knowledge. Manuscripts of the Trochala Gynecology Compendium and translations of the Ebers Papyrus sat on wooden lecterns beside prayer books. Monks cultivated physic gardens behind abbey walls, growing plants like sage and rosemary, herbs praised in those ancient scrolls for their antiseptic and digestive virtues. When the Black Death struck, they blended willow bark into tinctures, offering a primitive analgesic that soothed fevers and joint pains even as centuries of superstition blamed the plague on miasma and moral failings. By the time European universities formalized medical faculties, they recognized certificates of training from Salerno, Bologna, and Montpellier that explicitly referenced Egyptian texts. Students dissected cadavers. Anatomical exploration first pioneered in Egyptian embalmings, and debated the merits of surgical tools fashioned after bronze scalpels found in Saqqara. They learned to bind wounds with honey silk compresses and to administer enemas with brass pipes, all practices that had traveled westward along the threads of scholarship. Yet, as modern critics point out, not all that glitters is gold. The romantic notion of the Egyptian school of medicine sometimes overlooks the vast gulf between elite temple physicians and the countless untrained folk healers who practiced in villages. For every peshet supervising midwives, there were desperate families in the Fayum mixing impure clays and misidentified plants, sometimes with catastrophic results. Still, even these grassroots traditions often incorporated remnants of ancient wisdom passed down orally, recipes for lithotomy stones sustaining use well into the early modern period. In the 18th and 19th centuries, as European colonial powers dug into Egypt's sands, archaeologists and physicians rediscovered treasure troves of medical papyri. They found jars of still sticky honey, sealed vials of resinous salves, and, most astonishingly, buried libraries of scrolls intact in desert tombs. The deciphering of hieroglyphs unlocked new chapters of medical history, revealing treatments for dental abscesses, orthopedic injuries, and psychological disorders, cases previously unknown in Greco-Roman records. One remarkable find was a fragment of a psychiatric papyrus that described symptoms of what we now call depression and anxiety. The SW&W recommended not just potions of chamomile and mandrake, but also guided breathing exercises, rhythmic chanting, and participation in communal temple festivals to restore mental balance. These holistic approaches foreshadow modern ideas of mind, body integration, and social therapy. It's as if 3,500 years ago, an Egyptian physician recognized that healing wasn't only about balancing bodily humors, but also about rekindling one's sense of belonging and purpose. By the 20th century, medical historians and pharmacologists collaborated to analyze residue in ancient mortuary jars. Using chromatography, they identified fatty acids in embalming balms that today serve as natural preservatives in cosmetics, and they traced alkaloids in papyrus recipes that correspond to modern sedatives. Even mummy lab extracts, once a gruesome curiosity, yielded insights into ancient practices of deworming, suggesting that catapulted tablets containing garlic and coriander were administered prophylactically to canal workers prone to intestinal parasites. Today, integrative medicine clinics around the world stock Egyptian blend, essential oils, and herbal capsules inspired by the Ebers papyrus. Wellness retreats offer papyrus spa treatments, honey scrubs, natron-infused baths, and guided meditations invoking ancient chants. Universities teach courses in medical humanities that include readings from Edwin Smith's surgical papyrus alongside literary classics, underscoring the enduring intersection of science, culture, and narrative that characterized Egyptian healing. Even the field of public health owes a debt to Egyptian innovations. The concept of quarantine, born out of leprosy colonies, informed later responses to plague and cholera. The idea of segregating contagious patients in designated facilities, thought to first formalize in cities of purification along the Nile, evolved into the isolation wards of modern hospitals. And the principle of recording individual case histories on papyrus, then analyzing outcomes across large patient groups, prefigured contemporary epidemiological studies. But perhaps the most profound lesson of ancient Egyptian medicine is humility. They achieved remarkable feats with bronze tools, papyrus scrolls, and a worldview where healing was as much art and ritual as it was science. Their physicians embraced uncertainty, recording when a treatment works and when it fails, halting interventions when nature proved sterner than theory. They wove magic and medicine into a unified practice, acknowledging that placebo, faith, and relationship often determined outcomes as much as the active ingredient in a salve. So, as we wrap up this four-part exploration, let's reflect on the river of knowledge that began on the banks of the Nile. The next time you visit a hospital wing, step into a pharmacy, or consult a medical journal, remember the scribes who ground frankincense in mortar, the midwives who chanted Debes, the surgeons who drilled skulls in temple chambers, and the scholars who carried papyrus fragments across seas. Their courage to experiment, their reverence for the human body, and their unwavering belief in the possibility of healing forged a legacy that pulses in every beat of modern medicine. Ancient Egyptian medicine was never static. It adapted, evolved, and intertwined with countless cultures. In its fusion of ritual, observation, and innovation, we see a mirror of our own quest for understanding and care. In bridging magic and logic, community and individual, body and spirit, Egyptian healers laid down principles that continue to guide us. Document meticulously, respect the patient's story, harness both belief and biology, and always, remain curious about the mysteries of health. Ever wondered what it felt like to wake up each morning knowing your cap could be your deadliest weapon? Tonight, we're stepping into the grime-soaked slums of Victorian Birmingham to live a day in the life of a real Peaky blinder. By 1890, Birmingham's Small Heath neighborhood was a tangle of narrow alleys, coal-stained brickwork, and the constant clang of ironmongers' hammers. If you were a Peaky blinder, your world began before sunrise, a ragged room above a checkered pub, shared with three mates and the family goat. You'd roll out of a straw mattress, shove on trousers patched so many times they were practically hide, and lace boots stiff from yesterday's rain and yesterday's fight. There was no time for a proper wash, detergent was a luxury, so you'd rinse your face in a basin of cold water, half expecting a bit of brick dust to float to the top. Breakfast was whatever your mother or grandmother could scrounge, porridge boiled thin, a hunk of bread stale enough to crack your teeth, and perhaps a sliver of dripping if you were lucky. Teeth blackened by sugar and soot, you'd shove it in your maw and steel yourself for the day. The streets already thrummed with activity. Tobacconists opening shutters, drays rattling by, street urchins hawking penny broadsheets screaming of crimes committed in the dark. But behind every gutter guard and beneath each smoky chimney, Peaky blinders slunk, half-lurking, half-marching, ready to stake their claim. And the cap. Oh, the cap. That seemingly innocuous flat cap. Its peak reinforced with razor blades smuggled from the local cutlers. To the untrained eye, it was plain working-class headgear, but to you it was both shield and sword. Tilt it forward, and you'd obscure your eyes from the bobby's lanterns. Swing it down, and the steel edge could crack a skull faster than you could spit a curse. You'd stash a blade in the lining, tucked beneath the sweatband, and practice cracking walnuts on your knuckles, just to remember the satisfying snap of power. Your first stop was often the bookie's corner, an alley booth run by a fellow gang. You'd bet on cockfights, on horse races at Wolverhampton, on the outcome of bare-knuckle bouts. Cash was scarce, so credit lines were drawn in chalk on the booth's wooden counter. If luck turned, you'd pocket a shilling or two. If not, well, the debt collector was your older brother, swinging a lump of iron at your kneecap until you found the money. And since violence paid more reliably than luck, you learned early that muscle was currency. By mid-morning, you'd drift toward the canal basin. Bargemen offloading coal and iron paid in small change, enough to buy a half-pint and a packet of shag tobacco. You'd lean against a barrel, light a roll your own, and watch the barges creak. The canal was lifeblood, a way in for illicit goods and a way out for trouble. Smugglers had contraband and crates of rags. Prostitutes leaned against mooring posts, waiting for linces and coin. If you eyed a lone bargeman with a fat purse, you might offer assistance in unloading for a fee, of course, then slip a hand into his pocket when he wasn't looking. Lunch, if you dared call it that, meant soup kitchens or street vendors tossing bubble and squeak onto plates. Cabbage, potato, and whatever scraps they could scrounge ladled into enamel bowls. You ate standing up, back to a wall, eyes flicking for rival gang insignia. You didn't trust anyone outside your circle, even a mother figure stall owner who sold you extra broth for free. Trust was a dangerous commodity, and betrayal scarred deeper than a razor cut. Afternoons were for business. The Peaky blinders ran protection rackets for small shopkeepers and brewers. You guaranteed safety from rival gangs and from you. A monthly levy, paid in coins or in kind, kept shops open. Refuse, and your window got smashed before sunset, your ledgers burned, your stock sold off for scrap. If you were good at intimidation, you learned to lean in close, voice a whisper about the razor in my cap, and watch the proprietor's back straighten with dread. Then you moved on, leaving behind a trembling shop and the faint metallic scent of fear. Occasionally, you joined a police rat run. Informers sold whispers of planned raids to Chief Constable Bland, hoping for a few shillings or lenient treatment for a stolen chicken. You kept ears open in pubs and back rooms, listening for the distinctive jingle of Bobby's keys. When orders came, you tipped off lookouts fast as a fox who would ring a makeshift alarm, sending the gang scattering into alleyways and groaning cellars. Behind you, the clang of cell doors might echo, but you'd be miles away, counting your winnings. Come evening, work turned to pleasure. Music halls offered sultry acts and boxing matches in cramped rings. For a penny, you could watch bare-knuckle fighters dance in the dirt, trading blows until someone gave in. The smell of sweat, blood, and stale beer mixed with the tinkling piano. You might slip backstage for a quick hand job with a hopeful chorus girl, or you might slip out to a clandestine gambling den where stakes were half your nightly wage. Here, the rules were written in whispers, pack of cards, crooked dealers, and enforcers who dragged cheaters into back rooms for an abrupt lesson in fairness. Nightfall meant patrols. You and your mates wandered the slums, policing your own turf. You confronted drunken sailors mugging dockworkers, broke up fights between Irish and Jamaican laborers, and occasionally brokered peace over shared whiskey. Solidarity among the oppressed, black, Irish, Romani, and English sprouted from a common struggle. Yet any show of unity was short-lived when profit or pride took precedence. You clashed violently over turf lines marked by chipped paving stones and faded chalk crosses. Finally, you returned home, or what passed for home. 5 of you crammed into a single room, boots and blades by the door, soiled shirts piled on the floor. You washed roughly in a tin basin while your mates lit a tallow lamp, casting dancing shadows on the cracked plaster. Laughter and curses flew as you swapped stories of the day. The time you bested a rival with a single swing, the night your cousin got pinched by a copper but wriggled free thanks to a bribe, the odd job you took lighting street lamps for a few pennies. Before sleep, you'd pull out that cap one more time, flexing the razor edge against your palm, imagining its cold bite. You knew tomorrow would bring more of the same: poverty, violence, camaraderie, and the ever-present promise of blood and gold. As you slipped into a fitful slumber on that lumpy mattress, dreams of glory mixed with dread of the Charlie cops and rival lads lying in wait. Yet despite the grime and danger, despite the constant ache in your bones, you felt alive with a fierce, unbreakable pride that only a Peaky blinder could know. You wake before dawn again, stirred by the coughing of the corner boy in the next bed and the distant rumble of factory whistles. Today's the payday for the local nickel mine, and that means one thing: wages in hand, drunks on the streets, and pockets ripe for picking. You roll out of the single blanket, threadbare and patched, slip on your trousers, and check your cap. The blade is secure, hidden beneath the sweatband, ready for business. Breakfast today is hot tea from a samovar at Mrs. O'Leary's stall, a pinch of tea leaves, scalding water, and a lump of sugar if you're lucky. You exchange pleasantries in broad Brummy accent, then tuck a crust of bread into your coat pocket. Food on the move, that's how a blinder lives. The morning fog clings to your collar as you set out toward the Alexander Foundry, passing fellow lads in matching peaked caps, standing shoulders squared, gazes sharp. You tip your cap to Jabez Sweat Devlin, whose nickname comes from the time he wrestled an entire bottle of rum and won. He nods back with a grin that's more teeth than flesh. Outside the foundry gates, you size up your turf. The workers pour out in lines: miners, forge hands, and tram drivers, faces pale from black dust and stoic from years of back-breaking labor. The blinders run welfare here to keep the men in line. For a fortnight's pay, you provide a pint voucher at O'Leary's and guarantee no one steals their watch on the way home. It's protection, really, and you're barely thicker than their leather waistcoats. But when a careless loader tries to pick your wallet, you brush his hand off and remind him whose streets these are. A well-placed jab to the ribs, a whispered warning about your razor cap, and he keeps his fingers to himself. You pocket a few shillings from the foreman, official tribute for maintaining order, and slip into the crowd. The clamor of clanging metal blends with the clang of coins in your pocket. You light a roll-up, the tobacco smoke mixing with coal dust, and head down a side alley where street vendors hawk meat pies the size of your fist. You grab one, half-eaten as you step onto a narrow plank crossing the canal. Below, barges creak like wounded beasts, their lanterns reflecting golden shards on the black water. Midday finds you at the Crown and Anchor, a pub whose sign boasts ale as dark as night. Inside, the low ceiling bears 1,000 years of smoke stains, and the smell of stale ale mingles with sweat and pipe tobacco. You slide onto a bench by the hearth, where Craddock the barman slides you a half-pint. You pay in coin. No chit this time. You're planning a night out and need a clean slate. Around you, dockers swap rumors, a massive shipment of contraband whiskey due at midnight, police patrols tightening after a rash of murders in Digbeth, whispers that the Lee family's razor gang is looking to muscle in on Small Heath. You lean in, ear to the hearth's hiss, and listen. The blinders thrive on information, knowing which warehouse holds the liquor, which inspector takes bribes, and which nephew of a local magistrate's on our side. You stake a shilling on Craddock to tip you off when the whiskey arrives. He nods, winks, and pockets the coin. That's how you keep the lines clear, coin in hand, loyalty in word. The afternoon sun pierces the dusty windows as you head for a fitting at Mrs. Butterworth's tailor shop. Clothing is your armor as much as your blade. The tailor greets you, her measuring tape draped around her neck like a barber's ribbon, and adjusts the cut of your overcoat. You insist on a high waistcoat and wide lapels to cover the harness that holds your knife sheaths. You choose a pair of well-worn brogues, polished enough to gleam but scratched enough to show you've danced on broken glass. Style matters. A sharp silhouette tells rivals you've got both brains and brawn. On the way back, you pass under a sign painted with the words Small Heath Athletic Club. Inside, bare-knuckle fighters wring sweat and blood in a roped ring. You toss a penny over the rope, paying your dues for a quick warm-up. You shadow box against a barrel, snapping your fist in the air, feeling the rhythm in your legs. The trainer nods approval. He knows you're no stranger to fisticuffs, and lets you spar with Tommy One-Eye McGinty, a bruiser with a record of 15 knockouts. You dance around him, land a short jab to the jaw, and let him tire himself out before slipping away. A nod, a handshake, and you're out the door, your reputation intact. That evening, the moon is a pale sliver above the garrison arms. The air carries the low murmur of prayer from the nearby chapel. Most blinders don't mind church, as long as the collection plate doesn't wobble their pockets. You push through the door and find your crew gathered. Arthur's nursing a whiskey. John's counting coins from last night's bookmaking. Ada's there too, lace collar and determined eyes, reminding you that family isn't just by blood, it's by shared grit. Tonight's agenda, the shipment. The Lee Razor gang's due to unload 3 crates of bottled gin at Bishopsgate Wharf at midnight. You've been paid to secure the dock, keep out blue coats and rival hoods, and ensure the goods cross into the blinder's hands. You check your cap, flex your blade, and mount up in a borrowed wagon. Horses have striking sparks on cobblestones. The journey to the wharf is tense. You thread through tight lanes, keeping lanterns low. Every corner might hide a copper trap or a lee spy. When you arrive, you find the crates stacked like coffins under a lamppost that flickers in and out. You signal to your men quick nods, and they fan out, stations at the quay, behind barrels, and shadowed doorways. At exactly midnight, the Lee's men show up, 3 uniform trunks, but you spot the telltale gleam of razors beneath their caps. You step from the shadows, voice low. Wrong dock, lads. Best turn back before you catch a cold steel. They laugh, and one steps forward. You give him a shove, and his boot clatters against a coil of rope. In a second, fists fly and blades flicker. The clang of metal echoes against brick, shouts cut through night air, and whiskey spills across the planks. You duck a swing, ram your shoulder into a rival's chest, and send him stumbling into the cold water. He emerges sputtering, cap floating beside him. The rest break rank. They're not prepared to face a blinder ambush. You press the advantage, slash the air, hold your ground, and soon the Lee gang retreats, cursing and soaked to the bone. You gather the crates, tie them to the wagon, and grin. Business as usual. Back at Small Heath, you divide the spoils. A crate of gin is worth more than a week's wages for a steelworker. You hand bottles to your crew, 1 for a good fight, 1 for a friend's wedding, and 2 to Mrs. O'Leary's charity fund. Her stall feeds more kids than a school ever could. You slip a flask into Ada's hands, and she looks at you with that fierce pride only a sister knows. You did good tonight. You nod, but you know the real work is never done. Night bleeds into morning as you stagger home, the city's fog wrapping around you like an old cloak. You laugh with the others, retelling the scrap, embellishing here and there, just enough for a good story, not too much to risk a mix-up with the truth. And as you climb the stairs to your room, you sense the dawn approaching, a pale promise of another day to own these streets. Tomorrow, you'll wake to the same racket. Factory whistles, coughing, the distant bark of orders from masters who'd sooner see you in jail than raise you a wage. You'll check your cap, tighten your coat, and step into the fray once more. Because being a Peaky blinder isn't a job, it's a way of life, a code written in blood, grit, and razor steel. And as long as Birmingham stands, you'll keep your peak low, your blade sharp, and your pride unbroken. You pull on your long coat as dusk settles over Small Heath, its coal-blackened rooftops silhouetted against the burning crimson sky. Tonight, you're not chasing shipments or running protection. You're on assignment for Mr. Shelby himself, a political rally and boardishly invited by the Labour candidate, who's counting on Peaky muscle to keep rival Tories from breaking heads and spoiling the vote. You sling your cap low, feel the razor blade pressing just above your brow, a reminder that every step you take is both threat and promise. The rally's held in a drab town hall, banners of red and white fluttering in the chilly breeze. Inside, rows of wooden benches creak under the weight of coal miners, factory girls, and the odd disillusioned clerk. They've paid a penny to hear speeches about fair wages, shorter hours, and an end to child labor. You spot the candidate on stage, a gaunt man with a trembling voice, flanked by 2 portly union leaders wearing black armbands. Their eyes flick to the door, hoping you and your mates will keep out any troublemakers. Outside, the Tory agitators, bowler hats tilted back, shiny boots tapping the cobblestones, loom like vultures. They carry brass knuckles and canes, and you've heard they've hired a few of the Lee Razor gang as extras. Your heart ticks faster. This isn't just about politics. It's about territory, about who owns these streets. You glance at Johnny Dogs, leaning against the lamppost, cigarette smoke curling around his sharp features. He grins. Time to show him the blinders don't play politics, they own them. At a nod from your lieutenant, you step out. A cluster of Tories smirk, ready for a fight. The first cane swings low, aiming for your kneecap. You pivot, grab its shaft, and twist. The man yelps, dropping it. You slash the blade through his lapel, barely nicking him, but enough to draw blood, just a taste of razor's bite. Other agitators surge forward. You're in the middle of a whirlwind, fists and boots mixing with shouts and curses. A man goes down under your hammer blow. Another staggers back as you kick him in the gut. In seconds, you've cleared a corridor. The Tories stumble, outmatched by blinder brutality and precision. Inside the hall, the crowd erupts into cheers as the back door slams shut. The candidate clutches the podium, eyes wide but grateful. His message is delivered without interruption. You lean against the frame, chest heaving, watching smoke swirl under the gas lamps. The union leaders clap, hard, reverberating applause that feels like respect earned. You top off your cigarette, savoring the moment, violence in service of a greater cause. It's strange to feel proud of beating someone senseless, but pride is part of the code. After the rally, you slip through a back alley to rendezvous with Ada and Lizzie. They've secured 4 tickets to the Tivoli Music Hall for Saturday, an illicit treat in your rough life. Ada wraps you in a quick hug, careful not to soil her abolitionist dress, and Lizzie hands you a leaflet calling for women's suffrage. You tuck it in your pocket, more curious than convinced. The blinder world doesn't make room for political rights, except when wielded like a club. Next on the agenda, the bookmaking operation at the racetrack. It's Derby season, and Mr. Shelby Circle controls the bets on Cheltenham Road. By now, you know every merchant's gate, every back staircase, and the tunnel under the stand that leads to the Graylingwell stables. You meet Alfie Solomons near the paddock, his eyes darting, V-shaped beard glinting under dim lantern light. He jokes about lending you a leg once you lose the race, but you know he's serious. You give him your ledger, a handwritten list of bets your crew's placed, names and odds meticulously marked. His scribble and a nod return it. The money will flow tonight, dirty coin washed clean by the roar of crowds in the pocket of the bookie. The horses thunder by, manes streaming, hooves pounding like war drums. You push through the throng, heady scents of beer and tobacco stinging your nostrils. You wager on a dark bay filly. She's got speed but bad luck with starting gates. Your instinct says she'll stumble out but surge at the home turn. The race begins. You lean over the rail, heart lodged in your throat. There's a collective gasp as she nearly falls, then a cheer when she rights herself. You shout her name, like cheering for your own kin, as she charges past the others on the final furlong. You clap the rail when she wins by half a length. A shilling becomes a crown. A pound becomes a fortune. You catch Alfie's eye, and he winks, the circuit's king giving a nod to a worthy rival. Flush with victory, you're owed visits from debtors, men who bet on the favorite and lost. They slink along, downcast, hands extended. Some you rough up for their money. Others you let off with a warning getting money next time earns them a small cut, keeps them in your debt. It's business. The hunt for cash is endless, and credit binds people tighter than chains. You savor the thrill of gambling almost as good as a street fight, because here losses are paid in coins, not broken bones. As midnight nears, you slip away to your favorite haunt, the Garrison Arms Cellar. The landlord, a crooked gent named Murphy, has stashed a fresh barrel of rye behind a false wall. You knock the secret pattern 2 soft taps, 1 hard, then slide in. The air is thick with spirits and secrets. Murphy grins, pours you a tumbler, and you toast the night, to wins, to beats, to living another day. Around you, a handful of blinders trade rumors, talk of a rival gang's new Tommy gun, whispers that the police superintendent's got a file on you, maybe even knows about the razor blades. You sip slowly, committing every detail to memory. Knowledge is power, and power is what you sell. Upstairs, in a private room, John and Arthur count tonight's take. Envelopes of notes stamped royal seal, bundles of coins, red slips of betting ledgers. Arthur gestures wildly, spilling a handful of shillings across the table. It clinks like silver rain. "We'll be set till Christmas," he exclaims, raking them back in. John advises restraint, saving for bribes, for arms, for a rainy day. You offer a half smile. The future is always uncertain. Better to have funds now than dreams of funds later. Before you leave, you check the newspaper clippings plastered on the wall. Photos of suspects, printed descriptions of your dearest friends. You breeze past the superintendent's caricature in ink, feel a thrill knowing you're notorious enough to merit a wanted poster. Fame of a sinister sort, but fame nonetheless. Outside, the night air is cold, your breath visible in quick clouds. You make your way home with Ada, healthily tipsy. You walk past boarded-up windows and flickering lamps, pockets weighted with cash and influence. She jests about opening a women's shelter. You could fund it, she teases, with all that money. You laugh, gently bump her shoulder. Marriage and charity aren't in your immediate future, but Ada's fierce spirit reminds you there's more to life than blades and bets. When you finally return, the street's empty but for a lone figure by the gaslight. A messenger boy waits, hat in hand, mud on his shoes. He hands you a folded note sealed with black wax. You break it and read, Tuesday. Meet at the old foundry. Important. No name. Your pulse accelerates. Something big is brewing. Maybe a shipment from Belfast, perhaps a bribe collection from Whitechapel. You stow the note in your breast pocket, alongside the suffrage leaflet and the Union flyer, tokens of new worlds encroaching on your brutal one. Inside your room, you dump tonight's scavenged goods, a pocket watch, a silver locket, 2 gold sovereigns, and the racing receipt. You lay them out on the creaking table, proof of your prowess, of your dominion over the night. You arrange them like trophies, trophies that cost blood, sweat, and razor steel. As you undress, you pause before the mirror. You brush back your hair, expose the faint scar above your temple, a memento from last month's turf war. You study your reflection, tired eyes, dirt under your nails, the curve of your jaw hardened by years of living on the edge. You remove your cap and set it on the bedside chair, blade down, ready for whatever tomorrow brings. You slide into bed, full of whiskey warmth and adrenaline. Tomorrow you ride again. Politics, bookmaking, fights, maybe even a venture into the burgeoning world of illicit export. Guns to Ireland, opium to China. But for now, sleep comes as a luxury. Your dreams flicker with razor blades, hoofbeats, and roaring crowds, echoes of a life lived in perpetual motion. You drift off, knowing the old foundry meeting could change everything. Yet no matter what comes, you're a Peaky blinder, loyal to the gang, ruthless to rivals, and bound by a code etched in steel. And as long as Birmingham's smoke and grime choke the sky, you'll keep your peak low, your vision sharp, and your ambitions higher than any factory chimney. You wake to the distant clatter of horse-drawn carts and the hiss of steam from the new motor carriages testing Birmingham's first paved roads. It's Sunday morning, and while most souls attend chapel or nursing hangovers, you're already up, washing the grime of yesterday's scrapes from your face in a chip basin, checking the tatters of your coat for fresh bloodstains, then slipping on a crisp shirt and the overcoat Mrs. Butterworth just delivered. Today's errands are both business and pleasure, and being a Peaky blinder means keeping every angle covered. First stop, the post office on Bordesley Street. You step inside the low-ceilinged hall, head down to avoid the clerk's eyes, and ask for a single registered letter addressed to Mr. Thomas Shelby, London. The clerk glances at your peaked cap and the faint scar your hairbrush revealed, but you place a sovereign on the counter, and he nods. You collect the letter, no signature required, and head back into the drizzle. The missive's thin envelope feels heavy in your pocket. Could be from Billy Kimber with news of the Birmingham races, or from Father Hughes begging donations for the orphanage. You tuck it against your chest, planning to open it in private. Next, you stride past the new gasometer towers and towards Small Heath's newest venture, the Shelby Company Limited. The front door of the old foundry has been refurbished, painted deep green with brass handles shaped like razor blades, a little joke for those who know. Inside, the cavernous space smells of fresh timber and oil. Thomas Shelby sat behind his desk, neat piles of paperwork, an inkwell, and a ledger thick enough to choke a horse. He greets you with a curt nod and slides a file across. Our export permit for spirits to Cardiff has cleared customs. Need your crew to escort the shipment tonight. No lectures, just business. You tilt your cap in acknowledgement, then duck into the back office to review the details. 5 crates of top-shelf rye, 24 cases of whiskey, all bound for coastal docks under escort. The profits will swell the gang's coffers and cement your reputation beyond Birmingham. But first, family. You step out of the foundry and head down Temperance Street to number 14, where Polly's parlor glows with afternoon tea lamplight. Polly Gray, matriarch and queen of bookkeeping, pours you a cup of Darjeeling, her sharp eyes sizing up the suit and the letter peeking from your breast pocket. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she says. You sit, thanks her, and hand over the envelope. She breaks the seal and reads. Her lips tighten. News from Grace, your old flame in London, begging help. She's in trouble, debts to a crooked pawnbroker, whispers of MI5 interest because of Tommy's political dabblings. You glance at Polly, every possible angle spinning in your head. Do you send Ada and John to fetch her, risking unwanted attention, or let consequences play out? Polly sets the letter aside. Dangerous game, she says, but you sip your tea quietly, weighing loyalty against risk. Afternoon bleeds into evening, and you're back at the foundry courtyard, rallying the gang. The shipment leaves at 11 p.m. sharp, so you've got hours to kill. You nod to Johnny Dogs, who's lining up the wagons and mapping the convoy route. Flats on Small Heath Road have posted guards, lookouts perch on roofs, rifles at ready, watching dockside lanterns bob through the rain. The strategy's simple: speed, surprise, and superior firepower. And you've arranged a decoy, fake crates labeled machinery parts that'll circle back toward Debeth, drawing any tails off the real shipment. Still time for one pleasure: a visit to the betting shop on Stratford Road. Its sign boasts Shelby odds always fair, and you stroll in to find Alfie Solomon overseeing a swarm of punters. They're betting on next season's boxing tournaments and the latest greyhound coursing circuit. You place a wager on the Black Prince, a silky thoroughbred groomed by a Yorkshire stable master who owes you a favor. The odds are long, but fortune's favorite suits those who dare. Alfie smirks, shoves 2 shillings across the counter, and whispers, "Make it count." You slip the ticket into your pocket, the promise of more bloodless profit to come. Night falls, and the rain intensifies, slicking the streets in oily reflections of gaslight. You gather at the foundry gates, where your crew, 9 strong, checks weapons, revolvers and holsters, brass knuckles strapped to knuckles, and of course the trusty peak caps with razors. You've devised signals, a single whistle for all clear, 3 of them in quick succession for ambush. The mood is taut but electric. Danger pours adrenaline into veins faster than any spirit. You mount the first wagon, horses stamping, breath misting in the lamplight, and give the order: move. The convoy wins through Bordesley, past locked doorways and iron-barred windows. No privates or civilians are up this late, only those who work night shifts or those foolish enough to be out in the storm. At the junction by the canal basin, you spot movement, a pair of League gang lookouts, bundled in trenches, their caps tucked low. A whistle, one short, one long, and your men fan out. You swing off the wagon, blade ready, and shout through the rain. Birmingham streets belong to the blinders. Clear off or get cut. The Lee lads, caught off guard and drenched, scatter into Alley Street's mouth. You flash the blade in their faces, then mount back up and urge the horses forward. The docks are a slick maze of cranes and shuttered warehouses. You edge the convoy toward Warehouse 19, your chosen unloading point, while 2 men in the rear dump fake crates over a canal towpath. The ruse works. You hear curses as rival gangsters scramble after phantom cargo. At Warehouse 19, porters with forged manifests roll out the real crates on handcarts. You supervise, ensuring each lock clicks shut and chain rattles secure. Inside, crates are loaded onto a waiting barge bound for Cardiff. You inspect each seal, tattoo of the Shelby Company Limited in red wax, and nod. The business is done. Then the unexpected. A single lamp flickers near the warehouse office. A silhouette emerges, Chief Inspector Campbell, his long coat dripping, revolver drawn. He strides forward, holstering with a flourish. "Mr. Shelby," he growls. "I've been expecting you." The gang freezes. Campbell's known for ruthless efficiency and a personal vendetta against the Peaky blinders since the New Year's Eve brawl that left 4 constables hospitalized. You step from the shadows, right hand dipped into an inside pocket. "Inspector," you say smoothly. "Always a pleasure." The rain hisses against your collar. "I have evidence," Campbell continues, producing a folder, documents showing connections between your shipments and bootlegging rings in London. "I could arrest you on the spot." A silence thicker than fog falls. Your men shift, hands itching for weapons. Then you lean in, voice low. Inspector, we're all just businessmen trying to keep the lights on. Cardiff needs this shipment. People there need warmth this winter. You want glory? Be the man who brings relief to those harbors. Turn a blind eye, and we'll consider it a partnership. Campbell's eyes narrow. He's torn between duty and the prospect of saving face. The rain drums against the crates. Finally, he snaps the folder shut, tucks it under his arm, and nods once. One loose move, he warns, and I come back with a warrant. He melts into the murk, leaving you and your men drenched but intact. Relief sweeps through the crew, and you share a quiet nod with Campbell's fading lantern. You reload the wagons for the return trip, rifles and crates, kegs of ale hidden beneath, and give the order. Go. Horses clatter off, wheels spitting water, carrying blinders and booty back towards Small Heath. By 2 a.m., the shipment's profits have been tallied, enough to pay all men, grease a few palm pockets at the docks, and still leave a healthy surplus for the company's coffers. You hand out envelopes of notes, the men grin, tuck the wealth into shirts, and head home. You linger to lock the foundry doors, wipe the rain from the brass blade handle affixed to the wall, and extinguish the lantern. A final look at the skeletal rafters, then you walk into the mist. Dawn steals over Birmingham as you return to your lodgings, boots echoing on wet cobbles. At number 14, Ada waits, shawl wrapped tight, looking concerned. You hand her the letter from London. She reads, Grace's situation more dire than you feared. Blackmail she cannot pay. Ada's eyes gleam with determination. We'll fetch her, she says firmly. Against every instinct, you nod. Family blood binds deeper than any razor's steel. You remove your cap, set it on the table beside the silver locket you'd found in your pocket, Ada's mother's heirloom. Thought lost. It catches the pale morning light. You fasten the locket around Ada's neck. She smiles, tears barely held back. You lace your boots, adjust the razor blade in your cap, and step outside. The world's a haze of smoke and steam, but ahead lies London, dangerous, unpredictable, and promising the chance to save someone you once loved. And so you ride, a Peaky blinder at the dawn of change, bound by loyalty, driven by ambition, and ready to stake everything on the gamble of family. Because in Birmingham, fortunes rise and fall like the tides of the canal, and only those with steel in their caps and fire in their veins can withstand the flood. Tonight we're stepping behind the gilded screens and into chambers where power met cruelty, the hidden, brutal world of a harem slave in the Mughal court. Prepare yourselves. You're about to witness stories of stolen childhoods, whispered betrayals, and survival in a place where beauty could be a death sentence. You arrive at the palace gates as dawn bleeds rose and gold across the horizon. The scent of jasmine drifts on the air, masking sweat and sweat-damp woolen cloaks of the gate guards. You're only 10 or younger, but already you're trembling, clutching the rough skirts of your peasant dress. Yesterday, you were in a village beyond the Sutlej River, chasing chickens and learning to spin cotton. Today, soldiers marched in, seized you without warning, and drove you here in chains. They called you tribute, a gift for the emperor's harem, that you feel anything but honored. At the heavy sandalwood doors, eunuchs in saffron robes strip you bare of your few belongings, a broken clay toy, a threadbare shawl, and push you into a dark corridor. Your name is erased. You become a number, branded on your wrist with ink that smarts like fire. No one asks your age or your dreams, only how soon you'll learn to bow and stifle your cries. A harsh voice rattles off orders in Persian, the tongue of courtly power. You don't understand the words, but you know the meaning. Strip, wash, clothe. An older slave, hair streaked with gray, shoves you toward a line of copper tubs filled with warm water scented with rose petals and almond oil. You shiver as you climb in, cold soap stinging your arms. Every inch of your body is examined, cheeks, soles, fingernails, by eunuch overseers whose eyes are as chill as marble tombs. Clothed in borrowed muslin robes and given a battered wooden comb, you follow your guide through halls of ivory columns and crimson carpets. Candles flicker in wall sconces carved with dancing apsaras, their painted smiles mocking your fear. You see the emperor's zenana, rows of latticed balconies overlooking courtyards where fountains glint like liquid diamonds. Behind every lattice a woman watches, concubines in emerald silks, princesses in pearl-studded veils, attendants in plain cotton tunics. All eyes flick to you, sizing you up. Will you be pet or threat? Your first teacher is a bow-legged eunuch named Dullet. His voice is hollow, his face scarred from earlier punishments. He yanks your head back. threads tiny braids into your hair, and forces you to memorize your new name, Gulpari. Seizing yourself, he snaps. Status grows with a shape that pleases the sun in court. Straight back. Soft gaze. Speak little. You nod, swallowing your panic, as he prods you onto a thin cot inside a chamber crowded with other girls, some older, their eyes empty, some younger, whimpering as they're scrubbed and shorn. Your days become rigid with drills. At first light, you learn etiquette, how to lower your eyelids when the emperor passes, how to fold your hands so your fingertips brush your waist, how to kneel on silk pillows without making a sound. One eunuch times you with an ivory measure, 3 seconds to sit, 2 to rise, no more, no less. Mess up, and you face the leather strap of the chief tutor, leaving welts that burn long after your tears dry. Afternoons are for schooling. You and a dozen other novices gather on velvet cushions around a saffron-robed tutor who recites verses from the Shahnameh. Eyes fixed on his lips, you mimic the flowing Persian cadences, though the words swirl past your understanding. Your fingers trace gilded letters in a palm leaf notebook. Mistakes cost you handfuls of rice at mealtime. Mealtimes are cold business. Chickpeas boiled in turmeric, flatbread so coarse it grinds your gums, and thin water flavored with pomegranate rind. You eat with dainty rings on your pinkies, tiny bells that jingle with each bite, a constant reminder that you are both decoration and prisoner. The older girls shovel food quickly, cheeks bulging, afraid to let the eunuch see a growl of hunger. By dusk, you float through lantern-lit corridors to the music hall. Here, more lessons. How to clap 2 ivory castanets in complex patterns. How to weave tambura rhythms into a dancer's shimmy. How to wink just so while keeping your neck long as a gazelle's. The emperor himself might appear, seated on a jeweled throne at the hall's end. Idly watching, he might nod approval or scowl. Your fate hinges on that fleeting gesture. Nights are worst of all. You return to your cramped quarters, fading curtains hung across sleeping mats, and huddle with your bunkmates, whispering promises of friends who wait at home. Sometimes, you glimpse shadows moving beyond the curtain, the favored concubines, summoned for moonlit lovemaking. You strain to hear their sighs and gasps, a cruel echo of the desires you will never know freely. Occasionally, a morning song drifts through the lattices, often for a girl who pleased the emperor too much and was moved to another palace, or for one who defied orders and was never seen again. Punishments lurk behind every jade archway. One day, a girl named Sitara dares to refuse the tutor's demand to recite a poem. Her defiance is met with a swift lash across her palms. The next morning, you find her kneeling by the fountain, wrists bound to a brass ring, her tears falling into the water. The eunuchs glare. No one else dares approach. When they finally release her, she hobbles away, wrist red and cracked, her spirit broken. You learn to hide your pain. In secret, you press your calloused palms to a cool marble wall and will yourself not to weep. You memorize the patterns of the lattices, 11 spokes in one courtyard, 9 in another, so that if you ever run, you might navigate this labyrinth. You watch the eunuchs trade gossip. Some fear the jealous queen mother. Others whisper of palace coups and assassinations in the night. Knowledge is the only power you have beyond your wits. Slowly, you adapt. Your eyes learn to flicker with the right mixture of curiosity and coyness. Your smile grows practiced, a delicate curve that suggests innocence without stupidity. You speak just enough Persian to ask for fresh water or a cool silk cloth. You braid jasmine garlands into your hair to mask the smell of sweat under the sun. You watch the favored maidens, learning how they bathe in perfumed pools lit by lanterns shaped like lotuses, how they paste their eyelids with kohl to look pale and exotic. You imitate them in the covert mirror of your palm, transforming your rough features into something courtly. Each morning you rise a little earlier to scrub away yesterday's grime. Each night you stay awake a little later to recite verses under your breath. When the emperor visits the harem, you see him glide past on a carpet of rose petals, his velvet robes trailing, the courtiers fanning him with peacock feathers. If he stops, if he pauses at your lattice, you feel your heart jag into shards. Word spreads that one slave earned a glimpse of the imperial gaze for 3 heartbeats before a rival snatched her away. That ghost of possibility is enough to keep you honing every skill. By the end of your first year, you're no longer just Gulpari the number. You're Gulpari the quiet beauty, the girl who hums complex melodies without error, who can cradle a sitar and coax from it notes that sound like weeping. You move through the halls with the grace of a potter shaping clay, no stumble, no misplaced breath. Eunuchs nod approval. Tutors sigh at your diligence. You have become both jewel and captive, and with that comes a measure of safety. Punishments come less often, replaced by small rewards, a length of embroidered ribbon, a sip of rose sherbet, a chance to hand a garland to one of the favored concubines. But safety is a thin veil. A single jealous glance from a palace favorite can erase your progress. A whispered rumor, true or false, about your origin could brand you as unworthy. You learn to smile through dread, to whisper apologies before every command, and to imagine your freedom like a mirage shimmering beyond the high arched doors of Agrafort. Tonight, nestled on your silk mat under the lattice moon, you close your eyes and practice a new lullaby, an ode to your mother's voice, a promise to one day breathe air beyond rose-scented corridors. You stroke the soft petals you hid in your robe, a secret treasure, and pray that your body remembers the feel of open sky, the taste of corn boiled in salt, and the warmth of your village hearth. In the Mughal harem, life is exquisite and unrelenting, a gilded cage where survival depends on mastering both beauty and fear. Tomorrow, they will teach you another poem, another dance, another posture that could seal your fate. Yet you steel yourself with a single thought, that your body belongs to the palace, your spirit remains unbroken. And that spark, hidden behind the cruel latticework of the Zanana, might one day light the path to your freedom. Dawn arrives with the muffled thud of slippers on polished marble. You wake to the echo of prayers drifting from the Jama Masjid, the call to far threading through the jasmine-scented corridors. For you, there is no prayer mat or communal worship, only the eunuch who arrives to begin your morning inspection. You lie rigid on your silk-strewn pallet as he shines his lamp across your palms, under your arms, between your toes, searching for signs of lice or disobedience. Any blemish is a failing, any hesitation an insult. You hold your breath and submit, your body once more subject to another scrutiny. By the time your hands are deemed fit for service, the harem stirs to life in earnest. Concubines peel back heavy velvet drapes to catch the earliest sunbeams. Attendants pour rosewater over brass basins. Musicians warm up their tablas in a tiled courtyard. You slip out of your private chamber into a narrow gallery lined with painted tiles recalling Persian gardens. Your first task: fetch the morning milk and saffron for the royal breakfast. A slip could spill the precious liquid. A stumble might bruise your ankle. You move silently, balancing a copper pitcher on your head, footsteps measured, eyes fixed on the tiled corridor. Behind you, a younger slave, newly arrived from Gujarat, tags along, white-knuckled and frightened. You grant her a reassuring glance, a silent promise that she will learn these silent steps too. In the emperor's private palace, you find the bucket and saffron strands waiting beside the low breakfast table. A chamberlain, his trimmed beard glinting under a jeweled turban, accepts your offering with a curt nod. He tastes one drop, frowns, the saffron must be brighter. You dip back into the pitcher and ladle another spoonful of milk, testing each dollop. Finally satisfied, he waves you off. This small victory, a nod instead of a scolding, warms your chest more than a hearth fire. You retreat, already planning how to improve next time, adding a pinch of rose petal infusion to deepen the color. Mid-morning brings the eunuch-run school for elite novices, girls who may one day become chambermaids or junior companions to the princes. You blend into the circle, palms folded, as a teacher with an ornate pawn-stained tunic demonstrates fine calligraphy, looping nastalic strokes that trace each letter like a delicate vine. Your finger follows the teacher's brush, mastering the subtle flick that distinguishes the word life zendaji from death mark. A slip here could brand you illiterate, and illiterate slaves find themselves scrub brights in the kitchen or, worse, separated from the harem altogether. You strive for perfection, your concentration so intense that the faint scent of sandalwood and clove incense seeps into your bones. Lessons end with a recital. Each girl must read aloud a verse praising the emperor's lineage. A mistake invites correction, and perhaps a lash to the shoulder. Sitara, the once proud girl now hobbled by punishment scars, trembles as her turn nears. She mispronounces Badshah and glances at the eunuchs. They smile thinly, thumbs twitching for the strap at their belts. But today the chief tutor dismisses her with a brief admonition, sparing the blow. You recognize the tiny mercy. It comes from pity or politics. Perhaps the harems need to retain enough slaves to maintain its vast delicacies. By noon, the corridors flood with exotic aromas and the clatter of trays. The concubines dine like minor queens. Rice perfumed with cardamom, skewered lamb marinated in yogurt and saffron, fried fritters of chickpea flour. You carry platters from the royal kitchens, weaving through a sea of embroidered robes and heaped platters. Each step is prayerful, each breath controlled. Dish dropped or plate clanged, and you'd face a night in the punishment chamber, hours kneeling on cold marble, head bowed until dawn. You keep your back straight, your expression blank, and no one notices you slip away with a single earthen bowl of leftover rice to share with the other novices. Afternoons are reserved for dance practice. In a high-ceiling pavilion, silk curtains hang between carved wooden pillars. Musicians sit on velvet cushions, instrument cases open like jeweled boxes. You slip onto the marble floor and join a circle of fellow dancers. The teacher, a former concubine favored for her beauty and suppleness, demonstrates movements so slow they seem to defy gravity. A tilt of the head, a flick of the wrist, a subtle shift of weight from one sandalwood foot to the other. These gestures carry meaning: sorrow, longing, devotion. Each nuance matters. Too languid, and you appear lazy. Too abrupt, and you betray your peasant roots. You mimic her precisely, sweat pooling beneath your hem as hot as the midday sun outside. When you finish, she nods approvingly, the first time you've seen her lips curve upward. But with praise comes jealousy. A favored concubine named Nazneen watches from behind the curtain, her dark eyes narrowed. After practice, she beckons you quietly to her pavilion. Her voice is honeyed but laced with venom. Your steps were nearly perfect today, she purrs. Shame you lack the face to match them. She points to her polished mirror. Elaborate kohl frames her eyes. A crescent of vermilion dyes her lips. You feel your own face is dull by comparison, skin olive-hued and plain. She flicks her elegant fingers and a eunuch appears to offer you kohl and vermilion. Paint yourself, little one, she croons. Learn to be more than merely skilled. You bow, mask your fear, and let the eunuch apply the makeup. You emerge with darkened lids and a tiny red dot above your brow, a symbol of the third eye, a mark of inner sight. When you study your reflection, you barely recognize yourself. The illusion of beauty both empowers and terrifies you. Late afternoon shadows lengthen as courtiers drift through the harem's gardens. You are summoned to escort a new arrival, a princess from a distant Rajput kingdom. She travels in a palanquin of carved sandalwood, veiled in ivory muslin. Her attendants carry peacock fans and blood-red beetle leaves. You curtsy as she disembarks. Though royalty, she is still subject to the palace's rigid codes. She must present her family seal, memorize her assigned rank among the concubines, and accept the eunuch who will groom her hair. You guide her gently, reciting the precise words she must speak. She quivers, her voice a tremor. You steady her hand as she signs her name with your sharpened quill. In that moment, you share a fragile bond. Two girls bound by silk and stone, removed from their homes and shaped into instruments of the emperor's will. As dusk falls, a sudden drumbeat echoes through the palace. You rush to a balcony overlooking the central courtyard. Torches ignite, and a procession emerges. Dozens of slave girls carrying lanterns, followed by senior concubines and jewels, and at last the emperor himself, his turban gleaming with emeralds, his robe embroidered in gold thread. He settles on an elevated dais, his face serene beneath the torchlight. A hush descends as the first dancer begins an entrancing Catholic routine. Her anklets chime like distant bells, her eyes flicker with stories of love and war. You stand among the novices, arms at your sides, waiting your turn. When the master dancer bows, you step forward into the glow, the polished marble cool beneath your feet. Your performance is nearly flawless, every tat and thumbcup measured, every eye movement translating a hidden lament. The emperor's gaze sweeps over you, then lingers for a heartbeat longer than any before. The courtiers murmur, approval, envy, speculation. You finish the final pose and exhale, heart racing so fast you fear it will betray you. Instead, the emperor rises and claps once, sharp and deliberate. The sound reverberates like thunder. Panic claws at your chest. Is this honor or doom? He beckons you forward. In that instant, time bends, no wall, no lattice stands between you and the most powerful man in the land. You kneel and offer him a jasmine garland. He accepts, placing it around his neck with care, as if about to crown you queen of the night. The eunuchs frown. Tradition dictates concubines, not novices, receive such privilege. But the emperor, a man known for sudden whims, smiles and extends his hand. You dare to place your trembling palm against his, feeling the weight of gold rings and ruling destiny. A current of electricity surges through you. For a fleeting moment, you are no longer Gulpari the captive, but Gulpari the chosen. Yet the price of favor is swift. As the procession moves on, you are escorted back to your chamber by an anxious eunuch. He warns you in a low voice, you must be impeccable tomorrow. Any stain on your robes, any misstep, any breath of scandal, and you will be destroyed. You realize that favor is a razor's edge, one wrong word, one fading glance, and your exaltation collapses into ruin. That night, sleep evades you. You lie on your thin mattress, the jasmine petals from your hair still clinging to the sheets. In the dark, you replay every detail, the curve of your arm, the dip of the dancer's foot, the emperor's steady stare. You touch the spot on your wrist where the ink brand smudges. It feels less raw than before, evidence that you've grown tougher. You clench your fist and vow to memorize every lullaby, every gesture, every phrase that might keep you alive in the days ahead. For tomorrow, you will rise again at dawn, prepare milk and saffron, practice calligraphy, master another dance, and perhaps earn a longer glance from the emperor. You are learning that survival here depends on adaptation, on seizing slivers of power in a place built to strip power from you. You will walk the fine line between submission and self-preservation, carving your identity from the marble halls of the Zenana. Though the harem seeks to break you, body, mind, and spirit, you have discovered within yourself a resilience that even silk and gold cannot contain. And that resilience, more than any favor or brand, may one day guide you back to a life of your own choosing. The sun has slipped behind the red sandstone walls, and the harem's lantern-lit corridors glow with secrets. You rise just before dawn, muscles aching from yesterday's performance and last night's tremors of excitement. Today, you'll navigate not only lessons and dances, but the web of alliances and rivalries woven through every silk drape and marble arch. Your first task is to deliver cleaned garments to the chief concubine's pavilion. Each robe is embroidered with her monogram, an intricate peacock feather entwined with a lotus. Should you misplace a stitch or snag a thread, gossip would tumble through the harem like wildfire. You cradle the folded robes against your chest, stepping lightly across the cool mosaic floor. Eunuchs flank you at intervals, their eyes flicking to the shadows for signs of disobedience or stealth. You slip inside the pavilion to find Marinissa rising from her silken mattress. Empress of poetry and jealousy, she regards you with narrow curiosity. You bow, place each robe on the lacquered stand, and retreat before she notices the momentary tremor in your hands. Next, you attend morning court, the gathering of eunuchs, concubines, and palace officials who convene to receive the day's orders. Seated on low cushions, you watch as the head eunuch reads aloud. The emperor will hold private audiences today, the princesses require new fans, and half the harem's girls must prepare ambergris-scented water for his ablutions. Each decree carries weight. Overstepping your assignment could draw punishment. When your name is called, Gulpari, prepare the ambergris water with the palace apothecary. You rise, nod, and slip away. In the apothecary's cool alcove, stone jars and copper mortars line the shelves. The apothecary, a wizened herbalist with trembling hands, measures ambergris shavings and rose hydrosol. He instructs you. Stir clockwise exactly 37 times, then counterclockwise 15 for balance. You count each swirl, reciting the numbers aloud in your mind to steady your breath. The mixture glows pale yellow, exuding a fragrance rich enough to mask even the stench of the palace kitchens. You pour it into crystal decanters and seal them with saffron threads. As you work, the apothecary confides in a hushed tone. Word is the emperor is ill, coughing at dawn. Eyes red. He may call for you. Terror flickers in your chest. To serve the emperor privately is both a gift and a trial. One misstep could lead to accusations of poison or of witchcraft. You stow the decanter under a pile of rose petals and hurry to deliver it before anyone notices your trembling fingers. By midday, you're summoned to the emperor's private quarters. The doors part with a soft click, revealing a low dais strewn with silk cushions and a brazier sending curls of incense into the thick air. The emperor reclines, his once bright robes muted by fever, his crown of pearls slightly askew. He motions you forward. Your heart hammers, but you steady yourself as you hold the ambergris decanter aloft. You pour a few drops into a silver basin of water and kneel, offering it for him to inhale. His eyes close, and you glimpse, briefly, the vulnerability of the man whose whims determine your fate. When he opens his eyes, they glint with gratitude. He murmurs a word, your new title, nor eyes in it, light of splendor, and dismisses you with a faint smile. You exit on unsteady legs. The eunuchs and concubines glance your way, whispers rising like wind through trees. Nor eyes in it. They'll call you that now. With a new name comes scrutiny, greater tasks, greater jealousy. You slip away to hide behind a pillar, pressing your palm to your chest, letting the shock and pride wash through you. Afternoon brings training in etiquette for court audiences. A senior concubine, Munira, renowned for her cunning mind, leads you through the strict dance of protocol, how to present petitions in verse, the correct number of curtsies to perform before each minister, how to duck your hands inside your sleeves just so to avoid displaying too much skin. Each movement is calculated, each word weighed. You practice before a gilded mirror, focusing on the tilt of your chin and the soft inflection of your voice. Mistakes cost more than a slap, they cost reputation. As you learn, you notice a newcomer at the fringes, a tall girl with dark braids and fierce eyes named Zebanisa. She watches you intently, her lips pressed in a line of suspicion. You recognize her from yesterday's dance, the one who performed flawlessly yet received no praise. There's an unspoken rivalry. She believes you've stolen the Emperor's favor too soon. You force a polite nod but steel yourself for the tension simmering beneath her calm facade. Late afternoon, the harem's library opens for selected girls to consult illuminated manuscripts, poetry, histories, treatises on governance. You've secretly mastered enough Persian to read a few lines, and you choose a volume of Mirza Akbar's Chronicles. As you turn the parchment pages, you consider the apothecary's words. The emperor's illness might intensify. If he dies, the palace will plunge into chaos, power struggles, reassignments, possible purges of favored slaves. Knowledge could be your greatest ally. You memorize passages describing palace coups and distant courts, resolving to keep your wits sharp. Evening descends with layers of caramel-hued dusk. Tonight, the harem hosts a celebration for the emperor's latest birth anniversary. Lanterns line the high courtyard, reflecting off the marble floor, and the air is thick with the scent of jasmine and roasted lamb. You're chosen to lead the opening verse, a poetic invocation praising the emperor's lineage. Your voice rings out, measured, melodious, each word coated in honeyed reverence. As the verses conclude, the gathered concubines and eunuchs applaud in muted claps, then step aside for the dancers. You move into the center, weaving through the circle of companions. The music swells, daleks, sitars, and flutes converging in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. You lift your skirt slightly with one hand, revealing anklets of gold that tinkle like laughter. With the other hand, you hold aloft a single candle. Each step is deliberate, a masquerade of desire and submission. Your eyes flick to the latticed balcony where the emperor watches, his silhouette flickering in torchlight. He inclines his head, and your breath catches, a silent command to continue. The dance crescendos in a swirl of silk and flame. You imagine the courtyard's mosaic floor as a map of your fate, each footfall a choice, each spin a gamble. When the dance ends, the emperor beckons again. This time, he descends from the balcony, his weakened frame supported by two eunuchs. He approaches you, voice soft. Tell me, nor eyes in it, what do you wish most? Courtiers freeze in shock. No slave has ever been asked so directly. You swallow, heart pounding, and answer, to serve you faithfully, my lord, and to learn the wisdom of your court. He nods, then gently lifts your hand and brushes his fingertips across your palm, tracing the ink brand. Then you shall study with my vizier, he says. Come at dawn. A mixture of triumph and dread blooms in your chest. To study with the vizier is to step into the epicenter of power, access to secrets, alliances, and strategies that even senior eunuchs rarely glimpse. But it's also to court envy and suspicion. As you bow and retreat, Zebanisa's dark gaze meets yours. No words pass between you, but you understand. Your ascent has only just begun, and your greatest challenge lies not in dancing or serving, but in outmaneuvering rivals who hunger for your fall. That night, sleep treads lightly. In the hush of your cell, you unroll a scrap of parchment stolen from the library and copy the vizier's emblem, a lion and sun, committing it to memory. You imagine the gilded study, the stacks of documents, the hushed negotiations between nobles. You practice the courtier's greeting, Zijat Taimok, glory of the realm, how you will address the vizier himself. Your hand shakes as you lift the pen, ink blotching the paper, but you press on. By the time sleep finally claims you, your mind is alight with possibility and risk. You have crossed thresholds no ordinary slave could dream of. Favor with the emperor, a secret education, a new name that glows like a promise. Yet around every corner lurks danger: jealous concubines, watchful eunuchs, court factions vying for influence. In the heart of the Mughal palace, power is a prey that chewers through bones. Tomorrow, at dawn, you'll stand before the vizier in his scented library, silk carpets muffling your footsteps, bronze lamps casting amber light on pages of statecraft. You will bow, offer your deference, and hope your words and actions prove worthy of Nor-Izinet. Your body remains a slave's, bound by walls and chains of silk, but your mind, sharpened by poems and politics, sparks with a hunger for something beyond confinement, knowledge that might one day open the palace gates forever. And so you steel yourself for the day ahead, knowing that in the silken shadows of power, only the sharpest wit and fiercest will survive. The first light of dawn filters through the latticework, casting geometric patterns on the mosaic floor as you steel yourself for the vizier's chamber. Clutching the folded petition you hand-copied the night before, you slip past the silent eunuchs, your heart drumming against your ribs. The corridor is hushed, broken only by distant footfalls and the soft murmur of servants stirring. You round a pillar engraved with gold filigree and find the vizier waiting beside a low wooden desk piled with scrolls. His sharp eyes narrow as you approach Nor-Izinet, bearer of the emperor's favor, yet still a slave. You bow deeply, voice steady as you speak his new title, Zijataimolk, and present your petition for study under his guidance. He takes the parchment, runs a fingertip over your careful script, and nods once. Begin, he says, gesturing to a stack of treatises on statecraft. You spend the morning poring over texts on revenue collection and provincial governance, the vizier's measured voice explaining the subtleties of agrarian taxes and court protocols. Each term you learn feels like a key turning in a lock: patvaris, kanungo, jaggers, mechanisms of power that decide the fate of millions. You scribble notes on scraps of palm leaf, hiding them in your robe's folds. Occasionally the vizier pauses to test your recall. What is the emperor's stance on zamindari disputes? You answer without hesitation, and he allows himself the slightest of approving smiles. Despite your trembling palms, you realize that knowledge is your strongest weapon here, and with each lesson, the walls of your gilded prison seem less insurmountable. By midday, word has spread through the zenana that you're studying with the vizier. Whispers follow you like shadows. Some girls murmur at your sudden rise. Others see with envy, led by Zeba Nice's calculating glare. You glimpse her slip from practice in the music pavilion, lingering in the shadows to watch you pass. In the echoing corridors, you overhear a maid warning a companion. The emperor's whims change like monsoon winds. Today's favorite is tomorrow's outcast. The warning chills you, but it also steels your resolve. If you are to survive and perhaps escape one day, you must remain indispensable beyond beauty or dance. You must become indispensable through intellect and loyalty. Afternoon brings a rare summons. The Empress Mother has requested a private recital of courtly poetry. Draped in a mantle of ivory silk, she presides over a semicircle of concubines, her jeweled fan flicking away stray rose petals. You kneel before her, reciting verses in flawless Persian, each line a tribute to her lineage and wisdom. As you finish, she inclines her head, and for a moment, her piercing gaze softens. She beckons you closer, whispering a question about a forgotten sonnet of Jamie. When you answer correctly, she allows you a fleeting smile, an older woman's approval that tastes sweeter than any reward. Yet as you rise, she murmurs to a handmaiden, "Watch her closely. Not all gifts come without cost." You feel the weight of her words settle like dusk on your shoulders. That evening, you slip into the hidden sanctum you discovered days ago, a small alcove behind a tapestry of lotus blossoms. There, with trembling fingers, you unfold the documents you clandestinely collected from the vizier's desk: edicts on land redistribution, plans for new canals, list of regional governors marked for replacement. You study them by the flicker of a stolen lamp, realizing that these scrolls could free you if delivered into the right hands, perhaps the Mughal governors sympathetic to the plight of the harem slaves, or foreign merchants who crave political information. Your plan takes shape. You will encode these secrets into a poem, smuggled out in the folds of a musical score, and send it beyond the palace walls. Freedom may lie not in running past the guards, but in bending the currents of power to your will. Late into the night, you steal away to the eunuch Dulat's quarters. Despite his harsh rule, he respects your intellect and sees in your vulnerability a mirror of his own past. You confide in him, your desire not just for survival, but for escape. His lined face softens with understanding. "There is a way," he whispers, revealing a narrow passage used for secret messages between the Zenana and the outer court. It opens through the abandoned bathhouse beneath the eastern tower. But the route is perilous, patrolled by guards on all sides, and if caught, you will be executed as a traitor. You weigh the risk, knowing that once you move, there can be no turning back. The next day, the emperor's cough has worsened. Courtiers talk of his frailty and the looming question of succession. You attend the noon audience, standing among the silent rows of concubines, watching as the ailing ruler intones brief orders in a voice raspy as sandalwood smoke. When he gazes in your direction, you offer a low curtsy, wrapping your scarf tighter to hide the sealing of the scroll encoded in its hem. In that moment, Zulfikar Khan, the ambitious nephew of the chief eunuch, steps forward to present a tribute from Sind. His eyes catch yours, and you sense suspicion flickering behind his calm veneer. He may already suspect your clandestine alliance with Dulat. You draw a quiet breath. The game has begun. That night, during the Festival of Diwali Lanterns, you enact the final phase. Under the guise of presenting each concubine with a lamp, you light a series of floating oil bowls along the hidden corridor. The guards, drawn by the spectacle, cluster at the entrance to marvel at the beauty, leaving the passage vulnerable. Cloaked in darkness, you slip through the bathhouse door. Heart pounding as cold damp air greets you. Dulat waits with a silent nod, lantern in hand. You press the folded poem, its stanzas encoding every secret from your scarf into his palm. "Deliver this to Raja Jai Singh," you whisper, naming the one noble you trust to champion your cause. He inclines his head, disappearing down the narrow tunnel. You emerge at dawn into the courtyard of the outer palace, breathing air so fresh it stings your lungs. The guards shift uneasily as you move toward the stables, where a loyal groom harnesses a borrowed mare. You mount without ceremony, feeling the animal's warm flank beneath you. As you gallop toward the city gates, toward the promise of freedom, you glance back at the rising sun over the red fort walls. You carry with you the knowledge of court secrets, the hope of justice for all harem slaves, and the fragile spark of your own unbroken spirit. Beyond the palace walls, the world awaits, its alleys bustling with merchants, its bazaars alive with color and clamor. You ride into the dawn, no longer Gulpari the caged flower, but Gulpari the liberated scholar, whose whispers could topple empires and whose courage might light the path for countless others. And though your future remains unwritten, you press forward into the sprawling city, guided by the memory of marble corridors, scented baths, and the fierce determination that burned within you long after the silks and chains were left behind.